Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. It was a very quiet and cold night. My boots sank into the sand with each step, and each inhale brought the sour tang of decay, as if something long dead lay buried beneath the dunes. "No wild beast can scare me," Cooper used to say, but now I clutched a glowing ember in my palm, its fragile warmth the only defense against the bone-deep chill. When I swept my eyes over the ground, fresh hoofprints crossed older footprints, proof that someone, Cooper or another soul, had passed this way just hours ago. I followed the shallow hoofprints, ghost trails pressed into the earth. They zigged and zagged without sense, as if the rider had cowered, danced, then broken free again. Cooper wasn't a man to panic. He bore storms and stampedes without flinching. His horse was better, though. Steady as any ox, with the patience of a saint. But the bay had been restless all night, and I'd heard whinnies swallowed by canyon walls. The night had worn on long enough that I almost convinced myself it was nothing more than wind against leather. Then I spotted what I'd feared. A scrap of wool, dull gray, snagged on a cholla barb, fuzzy threads catching a beam of moonlight like a tumbleweed's prayer flag. I tugged it free and held it up. Cooper's coat, the one with the battered brass buttons I'd polished before our last cattle drive. My chest tightened. He could not have wandered this far by choice. I slipped my Colt back into its holster, knowing a gun might earn me nothing in the deep dark. I kept the wool in my pocket, pressed against my beating heart, and continued. The hoofprints led to a shallow wash where scoured rock lay bare, slick, pale quartz shining beneath the dust. Here, the prints vanished altogether. My feet sank waist-deep in loose gravel, and the moonlight grew cold as granite shadows pooled around me. The ember's warmth was gone. I cupped the tattered scraps of ember ash in my palm and blew, scattering gray powder into the breeze. There was a faint hum, like a throat singing in another language. I froze, tuning my ears to the sound that didn't belong, neither wind nor animal. It rose and fell, half breath, half song, and carried a weight beyond the emptiness. My spine prickled. The earth beneath my boots felt alive, humming in time to that unnatural note. I swallowed the dust in my throat and edged toward the source, a narrow gap between two boulders jagged as broken teeth. I'd crawled through tighter passes on cattle drives, but my bones ached at the thought. Still, there was no turning back. Cooper was out there somewhere, depending on me. Inside the crevice, the moonlight retreated. I groped ahead, fingers brushing cool stone walls smoothed by centuries of wind. The song grew louder, resonant against the rock like metal ringing after a hammer strike. I crouched at a bend and peered around the curve. A shallow alcove carved into the cliff face, half hidden by spindly yucca. There, on a ledge no wider than a saddle horn, sat Cooper's horse, bay coat dull in the dimness, mournful eyes fixed on me. The saddle lay abandoned in the dirt below, stirrups swinging empty. The horse nosed at the empty water skin dangling from the horn, lips foam-flecked. "Easy now," I whispered, stepping into the glow of reflected moonlight. The animal trembled but did not bolt. I knelt and ran my hand down its neck, feeling slick sweat where no man had touched. Beneath its hoof, something caught the moon's faint light. A silver buckle crudely pried from a belt. I picked it up and examined its engraving. A pair of crossed rifles over a lone star. The Star County Sheriff's badge. Not Cooper's, and yet familiar enough to knot my stomach. Moments passed in silence except for the horse's shallow breaths, and then I heard it again, that lilting hum, just beyond my right shoulder. I spun to find nothing but shadows shifting on the rock. The hunger that had gnawed at me since sunrise turned to ice. I glimpsed something move, a flash of cloth darker than night, flickering beyond a broken ledge. Cooper wore a patched duster of deep charcoal, but what I saw was more threadbare, ragged as spirit cloth. A quick intake of breath, and the sound changed, warping into a low whistle. Impossible for any man without lungs long gone. I inched back, jabbing the badge into my coat pocket without thought. If whoever, or whatever, had Cooper's horse held him somewhere farther in those rocks, it wouldn't show kindness to any sheriff's badge. The world narrowed to a single pulse. Me, the horse, and the echoing whimper of that flute-like note. I turned from the ledge, intent on following the trail that had spiraled through the rocks. But the horse whickered, stepping forward to nip at my pant leg. I looked down and saw a ring of footprints in the dust, no more than 4, but each print far larger than a man's boot. They formed a circle around us, then faded into nothing. My fingers grazed the cold script again, but I remembered the cold steel offered no answers here. The hum rose into a keening song that seemed to fill the alcove, vibrating through my bones. I pressed my back to the stone wall, scanning for any crack or fissure. An escape, a hiding place, yet found only smooth rock and the damp chill of midnight. My pulse rattled so loud I thought it might tear through my temples. I swallowed, fought for calm, and took a single step toward where the prints had vanished. The horse stepped beside me as if guiding. I exhaled and whispered, "Lead on, friend." Together we moved deeper into the crevice, the hum receding with each backward glance. Sand crunched beneath our weight, stirring up ghosts of old tracks that clung to my boots. The moonlight pooled in small basins along the rock, like black water waiting for a drop of blood. I kept my eyes down, following the hoof prints that flickered on the verge of visibility. Occasionally, the faint shape of a footprint larger than Cooper's, 9 inches from heel to toe, would appear at the edge of the light, then vanish as I approached. The cavernway opened at last into a small chamber vaulted high above, ceiling carved by ancient floodwaters into mushroom shapes. The ground sloped gently upward toward a narrow exit, framed by bones bleached white. Rib bones of an animal long dead, or maybe part of something else. The whistle returned, a distant promise, echoing off stone like a hunting horn across a canyon. My throat tightened. I thought of Cooper's quiet drawl, how he thanked men for their company yet never asked for help. Now, he might be begging for mercy from whatever haunted this place. I paused on the slope, gun at my side, horse's muzzle nudging my hip. Between us lay the threshold to whatever lay ahead. Danger, hope, or something beyond understanding. My breath hitched as the whistle slowed, warping into a hollow laugh that sounded like Cooper's own voice calling my name. My heart jumped. I had to decide. Step into that chamber and risk everything, or turn back into the ceaseless night where the desert swallowed every lost thing whole. I raised my chin and squeezed my eyes shut against the strain. "Come on," I murmured, voice steady but voice barely more than a breath. The horse whickered in agreement, and together we stepped into the shadows, into whatever lay beyond those bones, both of us listening for the sound that would tell us if Cooper still walked this earth. I felt the chill settle in my bones as we crossed the threshold into that vaulted chamber. The horse's hooves tapped hollow against smooth stone, the echo swallowing each step and throwing it back tenfold. My fingers brushed the colt's grip out of habit, though I knew steel meant little here. Ahead, the ceiling arched high above, carved by ancient waters into strange, mushroom-like columns that made me imagine I'd stepped into the earth's own cathedral. The moonlight that filtered through cracks in the ceiling fell in slender columns, illuminating patches of bone clustered on the ground like an altar of forgotten things. Cooper's whistle, if that was truly him, had faded into a low, mournful wind that rattled through the rock. The sound vibrated through my chest, reminding me of the rattlesnakes I'd once chased off a collapsing cliff face by hurling my lariat near their coils. Only their rattle had been a warning. This was an invitation. An invitation I could not refuse. I took a careful step forward, heart pulsing in slow time. The bones underfoot crunched like dried leaves. I glanced down at them. Long ribs bleached gray. Vertebrae snapped apart, fragments embedded in the sand. A faint, almost imperceptible groove ran through the center of the chamber. A trench carved as though by a deliberate hand, not water. It led toward a rectangular slab that looked like stone shaped into a crude bench, stained dark in the center. I swallowed hard and approached, the haggle of my own breathing louder than any sound the world made. The horse hesitated at the lip of the trench, nostrils flaring. I held out a palm to calm her. "Easy," I whispered. She nickered and stepped over, hooves sinking 2 inches into sand where the trench's edges smoothed to a floor. I followed, running a finger along the trench's lip. The rock was unnaturally warm here, as if some ember burned beneath. My mind flickered back to that ember I'd scooped from the first campfire, its warmth a promise of life. But this warmth felt hollow, like the breath of something dead. I circled the slab, eyes on the stained center. As I neared, the air shifted, growing still. The chamber's acoustics swallowed the wind outside. Every pinprick of sound seemed magnified and then erased. A single drop of water splashed somewhere in the darkness beyond the columns, the reverberation like a pistol shot. I jerked, hand on colt, and the horse flinched beside me. That one drip settled into silence, thicker than cloth. Below the slab, I saw footprints, saddle-shod prints mixed with larger, heavier impressions, similar to those I'd seen at the cave entrance. They formed a semicircle around the stone bench, facing inward, as if an audience had gathered here. I knelt to inspect them. The prints' edges were crisp, not worn by sand, as though made within the last tide of the moon. The larger prints, 9 inches, maybe more, were paw-shaped at the toe, like a bear's, yet the heel was too narrow and the arch too high. Nothing alive in these parts matched such a print. A breeze whispered through the gap behind me, ruffling dust in thin beams of light. I turned to see the alcove's exit darken, a shape moving there, almost blending with the stone. I swallowed, grit catching in my throat, and squared my shoulders. "Cooper?" My voice sounded small, as if swallowed by the walls. No reply, but the shape shifted. It was tall, thin as a sapling, limbs bent at odd angles. Where its head should be, there was only darkness. As it moved, a low hum rose again, more felt than heard, like metal singing when struck. The bench's dark stain pulsed in time with that hum. I staggered back and sat on my haunches, heart clattering in my ears. I'd walked enough trails to know fear dressed itself in different guises, but I'd never felt this before. A dread that wasn't just for me, but for the world I'd known. The horse whinnied and pawed the ground, stamping bone dust into the air. The shape advanced a step out of the shadow, and I saw faint seams in its skin, like cracks mended with silver wire. It tilted its head as though curious, and the wires caught moonlight, glowing like veins lit by electricity. I rose slowly, voice trembling. "What do you want with us?" The creature cocked its head further, and the silence that followed was deeper than midnight. My mind raced back to the holster at my hip. When had I last held a rifle? But here, where stone met bone, bullets would only bounce. Its head dipped, and the hum reshaped into a word that vibrated in my skull. Remember. A gust rattled through the boulders overhead, shaking down a fine spray of sand. The creature's form blurred in the shifting air, then solidified. It stood half in moonbeam, half in shadow, as if pieced together by memory. And I realized what it carried. A fragment of a harmonica, Cooper's silver harmonica, bent and cracked, hanging from what passed for the creature's belt. My breath caught. Cooper had taught me to play 2 notes, G and E, to chase the heat off a cold morning. He'd always said music was a trail you could follow when you'd lost your way. I took a step forward. "Cooper?" My voice broke, but the creature hummed again, this time holding a single, pure note that resonated beneath my ribs. It put the harmonica to its lips and drew a breath, clean, deep, and blew a single note so clear it felt like a memory of wind through canyons. The note trembled, echoed, and hung in the chamber. My eyes stung. Cooper was out there somewhere, and this thing had his harmonica, and maybe his breath. Without thinking, I dropped to one knee and extended my hand toward the harmonica. The creature stood utterly still, the silver wire in its seams shimmering. For a moment, the world paused, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might rupture. Then the creature bowed its head and dropped the harmonica into my outstretched palm. The cold metal burned my skin, and I clutched it like salvation. I rose, gripping the harmonica as if it held the answers I'd chased 1,000 miles. The creature lingered at the chamber's center, silhouette stretching tall and jagged. I met its blank gaze and spoke, voice steady now with purpose. "Tell me where he is." No wind came back, only the faint rustle of dust and the echo of that single note still humming in my head. The creature lifted an arm, long and thin, and pointed toward the narrow exit behind it. Its seam-lit fingers outlined the path. Deeper into the earth, where rock walls pressed tight and the cold bit at my bones. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned and retreated into shadow, leaving only the soft echo of dust sifting across stone. I turned to the horse, whose eyes were wide, reflecting wavering light. She stamped again, as if urging me on. I slid the harmonica into my coat pocket and patted her flank. "All right," I said, voice firm. "We're not done yet." Together, we stepped past the bone altar and into the narrow tunnel beyond, every sense alive with the hush of stone, and the knowledge that Cooper's trail led deeper into darkness than I'd ever dared ride before. The tunnel stretched before us like the throat of some ancient beast, narrow and slick with moisture so cold it creaked against my boots. Each step sank into mud as black as the space between stars, and the horse's breath hissed in tiny clouds that vanished in the chill. The harmonica pressed against my chest, a weight both comforting and condemning. Every coil of my gut reminded me that this was Cooper's voice trapped in metal, urging me onward. I kept my hand on her neck, murmuring soft words I hoped she'd understand. "Steady now, Nellie, just steady." Her flanks heaved with nervous energy, but she followed without spooking, trusting me as I trusted the faint pulse of that single note still thrumming in my bones. The walls closed in until I could feel the damp stone with outstretched fingers, runic lines carved by water centuries gone. I wondered if this place had ever known light, or if the sun's breath had long since forgotten these passages. Ahead, the tunnel dipped into darkness so complete it swallowed the moonlight I'd carried in. I snapped on my lantern, its glow weak against the vast black, and the beam trembled as I held it aloft. The walls gleamed with mineral veins, white streaks of quartz and smoky onyx, and scattered bits of bone glinted like teeth in the mud. My throat went dry. Every instinct screamed that I was trespassing in a place no man was meant to walk, yet Cooper's absence drove each foot forward. About 50 paces in, the passage forked, 2 corridors sloping in opposite directions. The left incline rose gently, the right dropped steeply, a slick decline that vanished into inky gloom. I dismounted and let the horse follow me by rein, dropping to one knee. My lantern's glow danced on a set of hoof prints leading left, but beside them, heavier, irregular prints pointed both ways. I traced one with a leather-gloved fingertip. Narrow heel, wide paw, claws sunk 3 inches into the clay. The creature's footprints. I stood, sobering in the lantern's wobble. Logic said take the path of the horse prints. Cooper's mount would follow ground he knew, but memory whispered that Cooper wouldn't walk alone if he could avoid it. I bit my lip against the cold sting of indecision. The harmonica rattled in my pocket, and I pressed a thumb into its cracked surface, hearing Cooper's laugh in a dream. How he'd promised to play that tune when we reached Cattleman's Bend. I exhaled, heart slamming. "Left," I said, voice firm. "We go left." The horse followed, careful over the rise. The air grew warmer, mustier. Occasional drips echoed like distant hoofbeats, and the lantern revealed patches of carved symbols on the walls. Circles intersecting with straight lines, like a map drawn by someone who'd never known the travel above ground. My pulse throbbed. Cooper had never mentioned such signs, and his mind, honest as the prairie wind, would have warned me if he'd seen this before. We climbed until the lamp sputtered, flickering against a chamber that opened without fanfare. A vast half-circle carved into the rock, ceiling arcing 20 feet above, supported by pillars of stone striated in charcoal and rust. At the far end, a wide ledge jutted from the wall, and there, seated on the stone like some dark judge, sat Cooper. His back was to me, shoulders hunched beneath that patch duster, head bowed low. I almost wept at the sight, his silhouette a crooked cross against the pale glow from fissures overhead. I moved forward, boots silent on damp flagstones. Each step felt borrowed time, as if the earth beneath me might crumble at any second. I called out, voice wavering but loud enough, "Cooper!" My echo rolled back tenfold, and he lifted a hand. Gloved fingers splayed like a beacon. Relief surged hot in my chest, then curdled into ice when I saw his second hand, clenched around the haft of a carving knife, blade blackened, serrated like broken glass. My limbs locked. "Easy," I managed, raising empty palms. "It's me." He didn't say a word. Instead, he shifted his weight and turned very slowly, face hidden in shadow. The flicker of torchlight revealed hollows where his eyes should have been, dark as the void outside time. His mouth opened in a silent gasp as if he'd been strangled by the earth itself. I staggered back, heart hammering, every muscle coiling for flight I knew wouldn't come. The creature emerged then, stepping from between 2 pillars, a blur of seams and stitched flesh glistening wet. It placed the harmonica back in Cooper's slack fingers and knelt beside him. The sound it made was a low moan, like wind through dead grass. Cooper lowered the knife, arm limp, and the thing drew a breath that rattled the chamber like a judge rapping a gavel. And then it spoke. "Choose." Its voice was the crack of ancient wood under pressure, and when I looked at Cooper, I saw something wrong, like a candle forged from bone. The creature reached up, fingers brushing Cooper's shoulder, and the sheriff's badge I'd taken fell slack on the stone floor, dust rising around it. "Choose what?" I whispered, knowing it was a lie. The thing rose and made a slow circle around us, eyes, or where eyes should be, fixed on mine. Its form melted in the lantern's glow, shifting between Cooper's shape and something entirely different, long-limbed, head bowed, as if weighed by centuries of memory. The blade against his thigh, Cooper started to rise, a guttural hum in his chest, harmonica held like a lifeline. It pointed at me, then at him, then down the tunnel we'd come from, the path I'd chosen. Life, death, the trail. Each word sank into my bones. I swallowed, mouth dry. "I choose." My voice failed. The creature leaned forward, hum building into an unbearable pitch. "Choose, Cowboy." Behind me, the horse stomped, lantern swaying. The shiver of dust in the air spelled movement. I turned and saw other shapes at the tunnel's mouth, more of those tall, silent forms, rings of bone at their feet, fingers reaching. Cooper's frame trembled, blade sliding from his grip. I dropped to one knee, hand on his gaunt shoulder. "I choose you," I said, voice cracking. "I choose us." The creature's head snapped up, seams splitting, a burst of cold luminescence in its face where two eyes should be. It beckoned once, and the chamber quaked as if the earth recognized the word. The tunnel behind me swallowed the forms in shadow, and a single drop of water fell from the ceiling, splattering into dust at my feet. Cooper slid from his ledge, body too light, flickering like smoke. He reached for me, and I caught his wrist. His grip was ice and flame together, and his harmonica clattered to the floor. I felt the weight of every dusty mile behind us, the embers' warmth buried in my coat, and the horror of what I'd found here, a crossroads between what was left of a man's soul and the memory carved into the bones of this earth. I pressed Cooper's wrist to still the tremor in his bones, but the cold that clung to him seeped through my fingers. The chamber's hush pressed in, and even the dripping ceased, as though the earth itself held its breath. Behind me, the echoes of those silent figures faded, swallowed by the darkness of the tunnel we'd emerged from. The creature's final words, "The trail never ends," reverberated in my mind as I helped Cooper to his feet, his weight light as smoke. He stood there a moment, head bowed, harmonica dangling from his fingers like a tarnished promise. I slipped my hand under his elbow and guided him toward the exit. Each step felt borrowed, the damp stone slick beneath our boots. Pillars of rock loomed like sentinels, their carved symbols now seeming less like a map and more like a warning. Whoever followed these lines risked losing themselves. As we reached the fork, the warm pulse of night air brushed my face, a welcome sting after the cavern's chill. The horse whinnied softly, stepping forward to nudge Cooper's arm. I turned to the right-hand passage, the one I'd bypassed, and held up my lantern so Cooper could see. "We need every choice," I told him, voice low. "Even the ones that scare us." He nodded, stepping past me, and together we descended the slick slope. Gravel crunched underfoot, and the glow of the lantern spilled over walls lined with deeper carvings, figures dancing in circles, hands raised to moon-shaped sigils. They reminded me of the stories settlers told around campfires, tales of spirits bound by broken promises, of travelers lured to their doom by phantom melodies. I glanced at Cooper's face, gaunt and lined by more than age, and knew these legends had roots deeper than fear. At the slope's base, the passage leveled into a narrow corridor. Our breaths rattled, mingling with distant echoes that might have been drip or footfall. I raised the lantern to inspect the floor. Hoof prints, larger prints, then Cooper's boot tracks intermingled, as though something had walked beside him. My chest tightened. If Cooper had walked this way alone, he'd left no sign of life. Yet here, the corridor whispered of company, unseen and unwilling to leave. Nellie hesitated at the corridor's mouth. I dismounted and patted her neck. "Go on," I urged. She stepped forward, nostrils flaring, ears pricking at sounds I couldn't hear. I followed, lantern held high. The walls here were carved ragged, as if hacked by desperate hands, and the floor sloped downward until the air grew humid, scented with earth and something else. Something faintly sweet, like wilted jasmine. We rounded a bend into a vaulting chamber that opened like a great maw. Here, the lantern's glow revealed tattered ropes hanging from the ceiling, frayed and knotted around broken beams. Below, a shallow pool shimmered with water so still it mirrored our reflections. Cooper's hollow eyes, my own lined with dust and dread, and the horse's broad muzzle bent to drink. The creature's footprints formed a tight circle around the pool's edge, and I knelt to trace one with my finger. Mud caked my glove. I tasted grit in my mouth. Cooper stood behind me, gaze fixed on the pool. "That note," he murmured, voice raspy. "The one I played, it led me here." He crouched and touched the water's surface. It rippled outward, barely disturbing the perfect mirror. We thought the harmonica was a signal, but maybe it's a summons. I stood and wiped my gloves on my coat. "Then we answer," I said, though my voice betrayed my uncertainty. I scanned the chamber, ropes, beams, the distant shape of two dark archways flanking the pool. The lantern's light didn't reach far enough to reveal what lay beyond. I knew we had to choose one. Cooper's gaze flicked to the left archway, wider, framed by columns carved to resemble kneeling figures. I knew the right archway was narrower, its entrance draped in long roots that pulsed like veins. Both felt alive, both promising answers and horrors. He turned to me and managed a weary smile. "You choose." His voice was a sigh. I hesitated, lantern trembling. Memories of every trail ride hung in my mind. The squall that drove us into a box canyon, the stampede that left us stranded on ridges, the nights we sat by the fire listening to nothing but our own thoughts. Each choice we'd made then had shaped our fate. Here, the stakes were no less real. I squared my shoulders. "Left," I said, voice firm. "We go left." Cooper nodded, and we approached the wide arch. Ropes swayed as if stirred by a wind I couldn't feel, and the carved columns seemed to shift their gaze. The horse followed, stepping lightly. We passed through the threshold into a low, vaulted gallery lit by phosphorescent moss clinging to the walls. The air vibrated with a low hum, familiar, insistent. I paused, hand on Cooper's arm. "Stay close," I whispered. We moved down the gallery, and the moss's glow revealed images etched into stone. A man leading a horse, then the same man kneeling before a horned figure holding a harmonica, an image that matched Cooper's silhouette. The next panel showed the man alone in the wild, harmonica in hand, footprints trailing behind him like a thread. My blood ran cold. This place was older than any frontier tale, older than memory, older than man. At the gallery's end, we found a dais carved in the shape of a throne. On it lay a battered harmonica case, open and empty. I stepped forward, heart pounding. Cooper's breath caught. I lifted the lantern, illuminating the dais's surface. There, scrawled in deep grooves, was a single phrase: "Play to remember, forget to live." My grip on the lantern tightened. Cooper's whisper came like a breath of wind. It wasn't the note that summoned me. It was the silence between. The chamber shuddered, and the hum swelled to a keening roar. The moss's glow pulsed in time with the throbbing in my temples. I looked at Cooper, his eyes hollows, yet glimmering with a flicker of recognition. He reached into his coat and drew out the harmonica, silver dulled by memories. I swallowed hard. "Do it," I said, voice barely more than a rasp. "Play." He raised the harmonica to his lips, breath rattling the edges, and closed his eyes. Then he played a single note. G, so pure it cut through the roar. The hum stilled instantly, and the chamber held its breath. He followed with E, and the moss's glow dimmed until only the lantern lit the gallery. Between those two notes, the silence stretched and pulsed, and I saw them. Shapes emerging from the walls, faces etched in stone, then stepping free. Specters of men and beasts from the land above. They circled us, silent watchers with hollow eyes. Cooper held the harmonica steady, each breath trembling. I realized then that the story these walls told was not of a frontier lost, but of every soul that had wandered here, drawn by music and memory. I led Cooper and Nellie through the phosphorescent haze of the gallery, each breath tasting of damp stone and distant echo. The specters, pale shapes wrought from the cave's own history, hovered at the edges of lantern light, their empty eyes fixed on Cooper's harmonica. When he played again, a low, trembling G that vibrated through the ribbed walls, a ripple passed over them, and they bowed as one before stepping aside to reveal the far archway. My heart thundered at the sight. Beyond the specters lay a rising ramp hewn from living rock, spiraling upward toward a bright slit of sky high above. Sunlight, real sunlight, glinted at the ramp's summit, distant yet beckoning. Cooper's gaunt face lit with hope, and for the first time since we entered these depths, he smiled. We advanced, the specters parting to let us through. Each step upward felt earned, the spiraling walls carved with the same runes we'd seen before, now glowing faintly, as though feeding off the harmonica's tune. The air warmed with every rise, carrying the scent of open prairie and rain before a storm. I thought of the wide sky above Bear's ranch, the rush of wind across cattle herds, the comforting roar of fires at night. At last, we reached the top, bursting into midday light so blinding that I stumbled and had to shade my eyes. When my vision steadied, I saw we stood on a narrow ledge perched on the canyon's rim, hundreds of feet above the desert floor. Cooper sank to one knee, harmonica still in hand, and looked at me with tears gleaming on his hollow cheeks. "I forgot," he whispered, voice trembling. "I forgot the sun." Below us, the canyon stretched endless, deer picking their way along ledges, hawks wheeling overhead. Nellie nickered, nuzzling at Cooper's shoulder. He laughed, a brittle, joyous sound cracked by months of silence. He raised the harmonica and played a bright, clear E, then G, a tune half remembered but wholly alive in the open air. For a moment, time halted. Then the canyon walls trembled, and the runes carved into the rock beneath our boots flared with silver light. From the darkness below, the specters rose, dozens strong. Only now they looked less like ghosts and more like memories given flesh. Old ranch hands long dead, riders lost to drought, and at the very center figures tall and ragged with seams of silver, our strange guide among them. They advanced up the ramp in silent procession. Cooper's tune faltered, and he looked to me, fear cracking his smile. The creatures paused where stone turned to sky, specters and silver-seamed forms alike, all gazing at us with expectant reverence. I felt the weight of every dusty mile we'd traveled, the empty saddles, the vanished hands, the frozen embers in moonlit camps, all pointing to this moment of reckoning. Cooper pressed the harmonica to his lips again, But the specters leaned forward, and the silver forms held out empty hands, hollow mouths opening in silent song. My throat went dry. "What do they want?" I whispered. "They want the music," Cooper gasped, voice raw. "And they want me." Before I could react, the silver-seamed figure at the front stepped forward, taller than the rest, its head shifting like smoke in sunlight. It raised a hand, and Cooper's harmonica, still warming in his grasp, was drawn from his fingers and lifted high. "No!" I shouted, lunging forward, but Nellie whinnied and pinned me in place with a look. The figure turned its voided gaze to me, harmonica suspended above its dark chest. Then, in a voice like wind through empty canyons, it spoke. "Play." Cooper stilled, eyes wide, and the figure held the harmonica aloft, its seams glowing bright as blood under a full moon. The specters around us began to chant, rising in pitch, a sound that pulled at the edges of the sky, demanding release. My hand itched for my Colt, but I knew bullets could not answer their call. So I stepped beside the silver figure, heart hammering, and spoke into the blinding light. "Play for them, Cooper. Play for all of us." He obeyed, cheeks hollow, and placed his lips against the harp of reeds. His first breath was a shudder, the second a broken song, the third a steady, soulful G that rolled across the canyon like thunder. Then E, and the specters bowed, their forms shimmering, falling backward into the darkness below as though carried by the music itself. With each note, the runes at our feet pulsed and faded, the silver seams on the figures dissolving until only the tallest remained, kneeling on one knee, harmonica lowered to the stones. When Cooper played his final G to E refrain, the canyon swallowed the echo. The figure exhaled a sound like distant thunder fading into rain and lowered its head. Then it vanished in a ripple of light, leaving Cooper alone on that narrow ledge, harmonica dusted with stone. He collapsed against the rim, tears streaking dirt across his face. I knelt beside him, offering water from my canteen. He drank deeply and handed me back the harmonica, its reeds warped but intact. "The trail," he said, voice hushed, "never ends. But maybe we choose where to walk next." I nodded, resting a hand on his shoulder. The desert stretched before us, golden under the high sun, silent as the promise of choice. Together we mounted Nellie and turned our faces toward the distant horizon, toward home, or whatever came after. I guided Nellie down the sloping trail from the canyon's rim, Cooper's hand steady on my shoulder as the late afternoon sun burned our faces. Every hoofbeat echoed across the stony ledges below, a steady rhythm marking each hard-won step away from that living nightmare. The harmonica reed I carried felt warmer now against my chest, its edges smoothed by Cooper's fingers and the cavern's grim whispers. Behind us, the canyon's throat fell silent, as if swallowing the final notes of that ancient song. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant rain. I kept my gaze fixed on the horizon, where the prairie rolled out in waves of gold and green. Cooper rode beside me, shoulders slumped but chin lifted, eyes distant and luminous with remembrance. I could almost see him replaying every twisted corridor, every echoing chamber where bone and memory tangled until neither could be untwined. Yet here, beneath the vast sky, he seemed to breathe again. We rode in silence for miles, letting the open plain soothe our frayed nerves. Each puff of wind against our cheeks felt like absolution, sweeping away the musty echoes of those stone halls. Nellie's hooves clopped steady, her breath soft clouds on the warm air. Above, vultures wheeled in lazy circles, indifferent sentinels to our passage. I thought of home, ranch fences, creaking barns, the steady lowing of cattle that Cooper and I had tended for seasons. I could almost hear the hum of life beyond that silent frontier. As dusk fell, we reached a juncture where the trail forked. One path led back toward Bear's Ranch, the familiar route we'd ridden a dozen times, its ruts worn deep by wagon wheels and livestock. The other trail veered off into unfamiliar grassland, a ribbon of dusty earth cutting toward a lone grove of cottonwoods I'd only glimpsed from a distance. Under normal circumstances, I'd never stray into that remoteness at dusk, but after all we'd endured, I felt the pull of that unknown path. A chance, perhaps, to rewrite the next verse of our story. Cooper nudged Nellie's flank and glanced at me. "We go your way," I said softly, nodding toward home. "Let's get you back to the ranch. Warm supper, a dry bunk." His jaw clenched, and for a moment I saw the weight of choice settle on him again, as it had in that cavern. Then he shook his head, silver hair catching the last light. "There's something calling me over there," he murmured, voice rough with longing. "I need to see what waits beyond those trees." I stared at him, uncertain. He'd faced horrors I could barely name, played death's lullaby in places where memory bled into stone. But whatever lay beyond that grove felt like the promise of completion, or the lure of deeper darkness. I took a slow breath, braced my reins. "All right," I said, voice soft. "One more path." We turned Nellie toward the grove. Shadows lengthened across the plain, and the wind carried the faintest echo of Cooper's harmonica, G. E, so distant it might have been a trick of the dusk. Yet it steadied my heart. We rode in tandem until the cottonwoods rose ahead, their slender trunks whispering secrets in the gathering gloom. Under the trees, the air grew cool and hushed. Leaves trembled, silvering in the moonlight that crept beyond the horizon. We dismounted and tethered Nellie to a low branch. Cooper lifted the harmonica to his lips once more, fingers drifting over the reeds as if greeting an old friend. I waited, breath caught, expecting melody. Instead, the harmonica slipped from his hand and fell to the ground with a soft thud. He stared at it, unseeing, every line in his face drawn taut. I knelt to pick it up and found the reeds shattered, twisted like broken promises, metal splintered into jagged shards. My fingers pricked on the edges. I passed it back to him, but he only shook his head, lips moving in a silent prayer I could not hear. Behind us, the grove grew still. No rustle of wind, no rasp of leaves. The world held its breath. Then a single, plaintive note drifted from among the trees, an unbroken E that hummed through the trunks, pure and mournful. My skin prickled. Cooper's head snapped up, eyes wide as pale fire. He turned toward the sound, and for a heartbeat I saw the cadences of that cavern mirrored in his gaze, wonder, fear, and an impossible longing. He stepped into the grove, lantern in hand, following the note deeper between the trunks. I called after him, voice rough as gravel, but the trees swallowed my words. The note rose and fell, beckoning, echoing the shape of a melody that refused to end. I rushed forward, heart pounding, but halted where the grass gave way to cold stone, an ancient slab half buried in earth, etched with the same runes that had guided us underground. Cooper knelt beside it, whispering that single E into the night, as if speaking to something unseen. I reached for his arm, but he slipped away like smoke through fingers, lost to the music of memory and mourning. The lantern's glow danced on the stones, illuminating a line carved deep. Memory is the endless trail. The note faded, and the grove fell silent once more. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the distant scrape of hoof shod against saddle horn. I called his name again, but only the trees answered. their leaves quivering with a secret they would not share. I stood alone in the grove as the moon rose fully overhead, its pale light casting silver shadows on that ancient stone. Cooper's lantern lay at my feet, guttering low, and somewhere beyond the trunks, the harmonica's song drifted away into the night, untethered, unresolved, yearning. And in that hush, I realized the only path left was the one we could not see, the melody that would never end, echoing through memory and silence, asking a question that none of us could ever answer. The wind died as I stood beneath the cottonwoods, lantern guttering against Cooper's shattered harmonica and the runes carved into the stone slab. Silence pressed close, so complete I could hear my own pulse rattling in my ears. Every memory of that subterranean cathedral, every echo of harmonica notes and bone dust bled into this moment. The grove felt too still, as if the world had exhaled and left only its hollow breath behind. I knelt beside Cooper's lantern, half buried in fallen leaves, and lifted the iron hoop that held it. The flame quivered, casting a tremulous glow on the slab's inscription, "Memory is the endless trail." My throat tightened around the words. The trail hadn't ended in that cavern. It led here, to some root-bound crossroads where every choice carved itself into my bones. I set the lantern on the ground and rose, shoulders aching with dust and regret. The stone slab lay half hidden by vines, its edges cracked by time. I traced the grooves with a fingertip, feeling the weight of those who'd walked here before. Ranch hands and riders, ghosts forever bound to the land by decisions they could never unmake. And in that moment I understood that I was no different. A cowboy tethered to memory, drawn onward by a melody that refused to let him rest. A soft rustle came from beyond the trees. I raised the lantern, shining its fractured light into the shadows. Nothing moved but branches, yet I felt watched. The grove's hush folded around me like a cloak, and the scent of jasmine lingered, sweet and mournful. It reminded me of Cooper's laugh, the way he'd pluck petals from wildflowers and tuck them in his hat before a drive. Now those petals lay at my feet, dried and crumpled as forgotten dreams. I stepped back and surveyed the grove, heart heavy. The path home lay just beyond the trees, down the familiar trail to Bear's Ranch, where supper waited and a dry bunk would cradle my bones. But Cooper had chosen this path, drawn deeper into the unknown by a single note that promised both solace and damnation. I swallowed and called his name, voice hoarse, but the trees offered no answer. Only a ripple of leaves, as though something stirred just beyond sight. The harmonica's echo drifted on the breeze, impossibly clear. G. E. It called to me, too, tugging at the edges of my mind. I took a hesitant step toward the slab, heels scuffing dried mud. The lantern's glow danced across the runes, and for a moment they glowed faintly, as if feeding on that distant melody. I felt the urge to pick up the harmonica reed in my pocket, to play once more, to bind memory and silence into a single song, but the metal was cold and bent, its promise broken. Behind me, the grove quivered, and a soft moan drifted through the trunks. I spun, heart pounding, but saw only moonlight pooling on the grass. A shadow detached itself from the nearest tree, a shape half human, half glinting stone. Its eyes were empty hollows, yet I felt their weight, heavy with longing. It stepped forward, and I recognized in its form the seams of the creature that guided us underground, patched flesh and silver wire echoing the cave's runes. It raised a hand, slender and cracked like a dried branch, and pointed toward the horizon beyond the trees. I followed its gesture to where the first star of night hovered above the prairie, small and distant. It was an impossible invitation to follow Cooper's melody across open grasslands, away from everything I knew, and perhaps find him, or lose myself to the same unending trail. My throat burned with questions. Where had Cooper gone? Was he alive or lost among those bone halls forever? Could I ever leave this place without him? The creature's silent gaze pressed me, and I realized that my choice lay before me once more. Turn back to the safety of home, or step into the unknown, guided by a broken tune and the memory of a friend I might never find. I raised my lantern higher, its light trembling. The grove's shadows stretched long and hungry, as if reaching for my feet. I could hear the faint scrape of hoof on saddle horn, Nellie waiting for me to decide. The wind stirred again, carrying the lone note one last time, a clarion E that trembled with yearning and unspoken farewell. I swallowed, heart hammering against my ribs, and took a single step onto the trail that wound between the trees. The lantern's glow dimmed as the grove exhaled around me, swallowing the runes and the slab and every echo of bone and stone. The creature melted into shadow behind me, its silent form a reminder that memory never sleeps. I mounted Nellie's flank, Cooper's broken harmonica reed cold against my palm, and urged her forward into the night. The prairie stretched before us, vast and unknowable, the sky alive with stars that seemed to pulse with the promise of something waiting beyond the horizon. And as we rode away, the note echoed behind us, never ending, always calling. Which path will you follow when memory is the only map? Woke to the moon's silver wash spilling across the corral, restless and half-dazed. My head throbbed with the ache of yesterday's ride, each muscle in my shoulders and back stiff as fence posts. The world felt too quiet. No coyotes baying, no whippoorwills rattling the scrub, just the soft hiss of the wind crawling over the dry earth. I sat on my bedroll a long moment, listening for a crack, a snap, anything to break the hush. But the prairie stayed locked in stillness. I pulled my hat down over my eyes and tried to will sleep back, but all I could see was the fading glow of my campfire, cold embers lying black in the dirt. I didn't remember putting it out. Thought I'd left the banks alive with crackling logs. I blinked, rubbed my jaw, and rolled to my feet. The lantern hung from the hitching rail, its glass smudged with salt and dust, but inside the wick was dead. I struck a match, the flare scorching my fingers, and lit the wick. The lantern spat to life, pale and trembling like a firefly caught in my hand. The horses shifted in their stalls, leather saddles creaking as they shifted weight. I'd left old Bertha and the sorrel mare tied side by side, blankets snugly buckled. Now their eyes glowed in the lamplight, large and worried. I grabbed the lead rope and eased old Bertha free. She nickered softly, a low promise that she was still here. The moment the rope slipped from her halter, she sniffed the air and stamped her front hoof, as if she sensed something out there beyond the corral. I slid into my chaps and leaned against the rail, watching my breath vaporize in the chill. The wind moved down the arroyo, carrying a scent I couldn't place. Something metallic, like far-off horses bridled tight. My hand found the butt of my revolver, resting against my hip. I didn't want to draw it unless I had to, but I wouldn't risk being caught with my guard down. Out here, solitude wasn't peaceful. It was a canvas for the mind to paint terrors onto. I led old Bertha past the trough and unsaddled her, careful to hang each leather strap. The sorrel mare watched with pricked ears, shifting on her feet. Night in the canyon always had a way of bending your own voice until it didn't sound like yours. I told myself 100 times that it was just weariness, that a man living alone for too long started hearing echoes of things that never were. But then I'd hear hoofbeats at midnight, or find my coffee pot off center, or that harmonica playing somewhere out on the ridge, and I knew it wasn't just my mind playing tricks. I unsnapped the latch on the cabin door and stepped inside. The floorboards moaned underfoot, the air thick with the smell of tobacco and stale sweat. I set the lantern on the table and poured a swig of whiskey from the battered flask. The burn in my throat felt good, in a way, an affirmation that I was still alive. I let the warm sting anchor me, remind me of simpler nights. Nights when the only thing to worry about was the next day's turn at branding. But that was before. Long before the first time I saw the riderless horse, or heard that harmonica in the dark, or found the horseshoe nailed to my cabin door. Now, the world felt off-kilter, like waking from a dream to discover your bed's been moved. I sank into the wooden chair, lifting my boots onto the table. The whiskey warmed my gut, but the tremor in my hands wouldn't settle. I traced the grain of the tabletop with my fingertip, each groove and knot a reminder of every mile I'd ridden, every thousand thought I'd let slip by unspoken. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine the desert as it used to be. Quiet, yes, but full of life in its own way. The night snakes stirring under rocks, scrabbling lizards fleeing the cool, the tumbleweeds drifting like pale dancers across open ground. Even the wind had a rhythm back then, a shape you could follow from one rise to the next. Now it whispered secrets I couldn't catch, rattling the window panes like a warning. Lightning flashed in my mind, bright and jagged, and I jerked upright, knocking the lantern. It rolled off the table, snuffing out the light. Darkness swallowed me whole. I heard the lantern hit the floorboards, the glass tinkling once, then silence. Cold seeped through my clothes. I reached for my revolver in the dark and stood, every nerve thrumming. The horses had quieted, even their breathing was too still. Then came the whisper, faint, unmistakable. Words rattling across the cabin, low enough I couldn't make out the syllables. I pressed my back to the wall, waiting. The harp of that whisper danced at the edge of hearing, like someone was talking from the other side of a door. If I moved, it would vanish. If I called out, I'd break the spell. The wind rattled the shutters. My heart pounded so loud I could taste it. I fumbled back to the table and snapped the lantern back upright. The flame sputtered once, then bled golden light across the room. The whiskey glass lay on its side, half empty. The chair was angled away from the table, its legs scuffed deep into the floor. Nothing else had moved. No footprints in the dirt floor. No stain of blood that suggested more than my own fear. But my pulse raced at the sight of the horseshoe, still nailed to the door, unchanged, its iron curve pointing skyward. I forced myself to bend and pick it up, cold metal against my palm. The touch felt like a summons. I looked around the cabin, half expecting to see a shadow shift in the corner. But the room was empty. My own boots stared back, bowed as if in prayer. I shucked off my hat and tossed it onto the bunk. The sweat from my brow slid down my temple, cold against my ear. I slid a fresh log into the hearth and stoked a spark, the flames dancing to life with practiced ease. Light clawed at the corners of the room, pushing back the darkness, but the hush stayed. The way it pressed against me made me wish for a storm, for thunder to drown out my own thoughts. I stood there, lantern in one hand, horseshoe in the other, feeling the weight of time pressing in. The canyon walls outside felt like the jaws of some great beast, waiting. I didn't want to stay in that silence any longer, so I walked back out to the corral, will of iron locked around my resolve. Old Bertha and the sorrel mare lifted their heads, watching me approach. The wind picked up, and I wondered if it was carrying another whisper, another plea. I guided the horses into the moonlight and climbed into the saddle. The leather creaked under me, and I closed my eyes for a heartbeat, remembered the early days of my wanderings, how free I'd felt, galloping across nothing but sky and grass. Then I snapped open my eyes, tugged the reins. Bertha snorted and stepped forward, sure-footed in the darkness. I rode out, boots deep in the stirrups, hand tight on the reins. No path lay ahead, just the black prairie stretching wide. I let my horse pick her own way, trusting that instinct born of 1,000 rides. Behind me, the cabin's light burned small and lonely. Ahead, the horizon was a thin line, unreadable and unknown. I didn't know what I was chasing, but I knew it followed. Some debt I'd never paid, some memory left bleeding in the dust. The plains rolled on beneath us, and I felt the cool night air carve lines of fear across my skin. My heart hammered with questions I couldn't answer. Who was calling me? What price was owed? And if I rode until dawn, would I ever find what I was looking for? The wind caught my hat and tugged it loose, sending it skittering across the ground. I reined in, dismounted, and retrieved it. In the moonlight, I saw hoofprints, my mare's, and beside them, another set that should not have been there. They led off toward the east ridge, fading into the dark. I traced them with my boot toe, breath catching in my chest. Then I heard it again, the harmonica, a single, low note, as if someone was standing just beyond the rocks, playing for an audience of none. I turned, eyes searching the black horizon. The note broke, and silence returned, thicker than before, laden with promise and dread. I slid back into the saddle. The prints were fresh. The music beckoned, and I knew, without a doubt, that if I followed it, I might not return the same. I followed the ridge up into the scrub, every hoof step muffled by clumps of sage and brittle grass. Old Bertha picks her way sure-footed, and I let her set the pace, trusting that I'm not the first rider to pass this way in midnight hours. The harmonica's note drifts back again, wider now, 4 bars on a mournful scale, each note stretching like a lament across the canyon. I lean forward, hand on my revolver's grip, listening for any reply. The moon hovers low, bright as a pale coin, and the world beyond my chest feels empty as an unfinished prayer. At the top of the rise, I dismount. I lead the horses carefully down the far side, where tumbleweeds pile like drying bones against a fallen fence. The harmonica stops abruptly, and silence presses in. I slip the reins over a jutting boulder, cross my arms, and close my eyes, straining for sound. The wind sighs through the broken planks of an old corral, ghost rails more than fence. There's a crackle beneath my boots, dried leaves stirring in the breeze. I shine my lantern along the broken fence line. Shadows shift. 2 flickers of movement around a bent rail. I steel myself and creep forward. I don't see a man or a rider, but I find fresh tracks pressed in the dust. Bare footprints, toes splayed, leading toward the abandoned way station 30 yards off. My breath hitches. A man walking shoeless under open sky at midnight, far from any trail. I follow the prints, lantern low, eyes scanning windows darkened with grime. The door stands open, hingeless, swaying on rotted boards. The harmonica starts again from inside, one slow, bending note. My hand goes cold on the revolver butt. I step inside. The way station's front room is spanned by a sagging ceiling and stained boards. Moonlight slants through the holes overhead, illuminating layers of dust motes. A bunk sits in the corner, mattress missing. Springs curled like dead vines. A basin of Cracked porcelain holds a half-burned candle. Footprints pock the floor, both bare soles and the rectangle of boot heels. Toward the back, a small desk covered in dirt holds a ledger book, its cover splayed open. On the page is written a single entry in a neat hand. September 3rd, 1879. Below it, ink bleeds. I will wait here. Then a scrawl, don't forget. I swallow. That date's 19 years gone. I set the lantern on the desk and brush the ledger's pages. The next lines are blank, save for the stain of rusted hinge. I glance upward and catch the flicker of something on the wall, the outline of a face drawn in charcoal. Thin lips parted, eyes hollow. I'd seen that mark before, scrawled on the cabin wall, same charcoal, same pleading line. Help me, Sheriff. But this time, the writing's unsigned, signature worn clean. My throat closes. The harmonica's note breaks again. So near now I can imagine the breath behind it. I wheel toward a side door. Beyond it lies a narrow hallway, walls hung with peeling plaster and bits of copper wire. At the end, a crackle of motion. I step forward, lantern bobbing, my boots creaking on warped floorboards. Then I see the bed. Narrow iron frame, mattress shredded. On the pillow rests a handkerchief, faded white, edged in lace. Embroidered in one corner is a monogram, E-R-I, swallow again. That handkerchief belonged to Eliza Ruth, a woman I once knew. I'd left her in Tombstone 4 years back, rambling about debts and past wrongs, warning me off with that very handkerchief pressed against my palm. I tucked it in my pocket, convinced I'd never see it again. Now it lies here, clean in the moonlight. A scrawl along the wall above reads, "I'm sorry." My grip tightens on the lantern. I turn, intending to flee back to my horse, but the harmonica's music swells behind me, from the ceiling beams overhead. I flick the lantern up. No one's there, just shadows and the hollow hiss of wind. But the wood groans. Something shifts in the rafters. I back against the doorway, eyes wide. Behind me, the ledger book falls open with a snap, pages flipping. I step forward, heel clicking on floor. The pages settle on a fresh entry I swear I hadn't read. They're coming. The ink is slick, black as tar. My stomach twists. I turn to run, but the hall behind me has vanished. In its place, the room extends, 4 walls of splintered wood draped in white sheets that billow as though alive. I taste dust. Every corner yawns into darkness. The harmonica's tune, slow, dirge-like, winds through the air. I jam the lantern back on its hook, but the glass cracks under my touch. Shards scatter across the floor, reflecting moonlight like splinters of broken stars. I snatch my revolver and fire a round at the nearest wall. The shot rings, echoing endlessly. The white sheets tremble but do not tear. When the smoke clears, the hallway returns. The bed and basin are gone. Only the desk and ledger remain. The monogrammed handkerchief lies at my feet. I pocket the handkerchief and dash for the exit, but find the door braced against me by force unseen. I shove, foot bracing against splintered wood, and hear a whisper in my ear. Stay. The voice is soft, feminine. I risk a glance over my shoulder. No one stands there, just the lantern's shadow dancing. I kick the door once more and it bursts inward. I stumble outside into the night. The wind has died, the desert is stilled. My horses stamp impatiently. I vault into the saddle and spur Bertha west, away from the ridge. We gallop under a sky that feels too near, as if the dark would close in and swallow us whole. I don't dare slow until dawn bleeds the horizon pink. When I finally pause on a low hill, breath ragged, I find the horseshoe clenched in my fist, silver light still glinting on its curve. And tucked in my coat pocket, The crimson stain of fresh ink marks the handkerchief's lace edge. I don't know how either got there, but with the sunrise in my teeth, I understand one thing. Whatever unsettles these plains, it's bound to me, and it will not let go. I push Bertha down the trail, spurs light against her flanks, heart drumming in my ears like a war drum. Dawn's first light bleeds pale across the horizon, but the harmonica's echo still coils behind me, chasing our hoofbeats. I don't dare glance back. The ridge grows small in the rear view, but I know whatever lingers among its rocks hasn't loosened its grip. By mid-morning, the sun has climbed clear of the canyon rims. Sweat beads on my brow, saltburn stinging my skin. I tie the horses to an outcrop of sandstone and kneel by the trickle of a spring. Water limp and muddy, but enough to wet my throat. I cup my hands and drink, tasting grit and iron. Bertha and the sorrel mare lower their heads, lapping greedily. I let them settle a moment, listening to the breeze riffle through the grass. I think of the handkerchief in my pocket. Eliza Ruth's lace monogram now stained with that fresh, tar-black ink. Can't wash it away. It's like a brand on my soul. I roll it between my fingers, the fabric thin as moth wings. I remember her laugh, crisp as morning air, carrying dreams I never chased. And the way she warned me off with that handkerchief pressed to my palm. "Don't forget," she said, eyes shadowed. I packed her memory away, convinced it belonged to some other lifetime. Now it's come back to me, tangled with footprints that vanish and voices I can't place. I press the handkerchief to my mouth, stifle the sick that rises in my throat. I fold it carefully and lay it atop a flat stone, like a makeshift marker. Let dawn's light burn away the ink, or at least bleach my shame. I feed the horses a handful of oats from my saddlebags, then mount up. The spring trickles behind us, as if reluctant to let this place go. I'm bound for the old cattle trail, the Sunridge Pass, that snakes south through mesas and badlands. If I ride hard, I can catch the railroad workers at the siding by dusk. I hope someone there will have sense enough to call the marshal, to tell him a man's losing his mind out on the prairie. The trail winds up beside a cliff face mottled in lichen. Wind gusts down the gap, rattling my hat and tugging at my scarf. I swear it whispers, a susurrus of voices tangled like briars. Half-remembered jokes, snatches of song, a woman's cry. I ride on, pulling the scarf tight. My revolver rests heavy against my thigh. An hour later, I crest a low ridge and see the makeshift camp of the railroad workers huddled around a kettle. Smoke coils from a metal stack. I kick Bertha forward. She breaks into a trot. The men look up, faces drawn. They wave, unconvinced. I tie the horses and approach, holstering my gun. The foreman is a burly man with a beard, gray at the chin. His eyes are cautious. "Sheriff's out checking the line?" he asks, voice hoarse. "No," I say, throat thick. "Just passing through, keeping an eye on things." He nods, eyes drifting to the fresh prints in the dust. "Saw those come in last night. Horses found neat and saddled. Don't know who rode 'em. You see anything odd?" He squints. "Only that harmonica." He makes a whistling sound. "Heard it late. Thought it was that drifter McGree, but he's 2 counties over." I swallow. McGree was never one for melody. "Never followed the tune," I say, heart hollow. "Just rode." They share a look. The cook ladles stew into tin bowls. I accept one, slurping the lukewarm broth. Savory, but no comfort. I set the bowl down. "Mind if I rest here a spell?" The foreman shrugs. "Help yourself. But keep an ear out. Camp ain't no place for mischief." I settle near the fire, back to a support post. The men resume their murmurs about broken spikes and cattle raids. I nibble a hunk of hardtack. Around us, the landscape yawns. flat plains peppered with mesquite, distant buttes rising like sentinels. The sun's glare weakens the shadows. For a moment, the world seems whole. Then a single note shivers through the camp, the harmonica's lament low as a sigh. The men freeze, bowls in hand. The foreman's jaw ticks. He jams a hand to his holster. I rise, restless. No one moves. The note trembles again, closer now, as if right behind my ear. Cold rivulets trace my spine. I step away from the fire and toward the water tower where the tracks begin. The note ends on a stutter, leaving only silence. I strain to catch footsteps, but find none. The hissing of the steam engine half a mile off is the only reply. I turn back to the men. Their faces are pale. The foreman breathes through his teeth. "That ain't McGree," he says. "He'd hammer nails, not play tunes." I nod. "No," I whisper, "it ain't him." A woman's voice, distant, rises above the men's talk. A laugh, bright and unfamiliar. We spin. At the edge of camp, a figure stands. A woman in a faded calico dress, skirt frayed at the hem, hair tied in a single braid. She watches us, head cocked. Her eyes catch the light like steel. My heart lurches. I step forward. "Ma'am," I begin. She raises a hand, gentle as dusk. "You're looking for someone," she says, voice soft, melodic. "Someone who never left." Her words drop into the stew pot, sending droplets of grease skimming the surface. The foreman frowns. "What do you mean?" he asks. She looks at me. "You know him," she says. "He calls you by a name that isn't yours. He waits in empty bunkhouses. He roams the night, searching for debts that aren't paid." The air cools. I feel Bertha shift behind me. The men back away. I blink at the woman's face, young, pale, eyes unreadable. "You're free to go," she tells me, "but you won't find peace until you reckon with what you left behind." The wind picks up, and her dress ripples like pages in a ledger. Before I can speak, she turns and walks into the darkness south of the tracks. No footprints mark her passage. I stand frozen as steam bellows from the locomotive. The men gape at the empty field where she stood. The foreman breaks the silence. "We should ride out, Sheriff. Company rules." I shake my head. "Not me." My voice cracks. "I've got work to do." He glances at the tracks and back at me. "You ever see her again, you tell me." I nod, unwilling to lie. He mounts, and the others follow, riding off with the whistle's cry. The camp empties, leaving me alone by a cooling fire. I scoop up my horse, reins heavy. The harmonica's tune returns, one final note that lingers in the air. I tuck it into my memory and mount Bertha. As I ride away, the sun dips behind a distant mesa, casting long shadows across the rails. I pass the spot where the woman stood, nothing but dust and my own footprints. I turn in the saddle and meet my gaze in the lantern's glass. At that moment, I hear the soft echo of my own breath, and I know the story isn't done. I ride past the railroad siding until the sun sinks low, painting the Badlands in bruised purples and iron reds. The wind has fallen dead, leaving the air so thick with heat it ripples like a desert mirage. The harmonica's tune still echoes behind me, faint, mournful, like some half-remembered lament carried in from another world. I press my hat low and straighten my shoulders, guiding Bertha along a narrow track that cuts between jagged mesas. My boots rest heavy in the stirrups. I feel every ridge of leather against my calves. The world feels too big, too empty, too full of secrets I can't name. At dusk, I reach the abandoned homestead where I once lived with Eliza Ruth. The place has gone to rot. Split-rail fences hang broken, leaning into thorn bushes. The barn's roof caved in. The walls sagged like tired men at quitting time. Doors dangle on single hinges. Windows gape like blind eyes. I tie my horse to a post by the collapsed porch and dismount, body humming with tension. My revolver rests in its holster, but I draw no comfort from it. I step forward, lantern in hand, and the glass flickers. I can almost hear the crackle of the old fireplace, ghost smoke drifting from the chimney that fell years ago. Inside the cabin, the floorboards are strewn with broken crockery and shards of glass that glitter like fallen stars. Dust coats every surface. I set the lantern on the hearth, and its weak flame dances over the walls. There, scrawled in charcoal above the mantel, is that same message, "Help me." Underneath, someone has carved initials, E, R, and weary tally marks. 4 dozen tallies carved deep, as though someone counted every lonely night. My throat closes at the sight. My own hand hesitates over the mantel, fingertips brushing the rough brick. The harmonica note drifts back in, this time unmistakably close, as if the player stands just beyond the cabin door. My skin prickles. I spin, lantern aloft, and catch a glimpse of movement beyond the broken window panes, a silhouette shifting. My heart hammers. I consider rushing out, but something roots me in place. The silhouette vanishes and the night yawns silent once more. I swallow, forcing the tremor from my voice. "Eliza?" I breathe, voice cracked, my own name feeling foreign on my tongue. "Is that you?" The only answer is the whistle of wind through the rafters. I press my back to the cold wall and let my boots slide against the floor. The matches in my vest pocket rattle. I pull one free, strike it on my boot heel. The match flares, smoking. I cup it and light a second, then a third, until the hearth's embers burn bright. The cabin glows in an orange haze, shadows dancing. I stand the lantern beside the ticking of the empty clock over the mantel, long silent, and let the warmth settle. I cross to the broken bed where the mattress springs lie bare. I kneel and feel the springs. Each coil is cold as bone. The harmonica sound begins again, low and steady, da da da, all in a minor key. It feels like a heartbeat. I lift my head and follow the sound through the open doorway into the kitchen. Pots hang from ceiling hooks, swaying. The harmonica note trembles like breath through copper. I pass the table where a rusted coffee pot sits on a block of cracked plaster, still upright, still ready. I lift the pot. It's empty, clean inside, no coffee grounds, no stains. Yet I swear I smell the bitter tang of roasting beans. I step outside into the moonlight. The homestead's yard lies bare and trampled. Footprints, both booted and bare, circle the cabin, 24 prints. Some walk toward the barn, others toward the old well. I approach the well, lantern in one hand, revolver in the other. The stone mouth is crumbling, loose bricks scattered. I lean over, shining the light down into the black. Nothing but deep shadow and the echo of my own breathing. Then I hear a distant splash, as if someone dropped a pebble in water. My breath catches. I crouch, listening. Silence. I cough, sick with fear and longing. I stand, blood pounding in my ears. The harmonica's note ends with a breathy sigh. I wheel, lantern, swinging, and catch movement by the barn. I jog toward it, heart hammering, until I reach the lean-to where old feed sacks sag. I part them, shove into the dark. My shoulder strikes wood. I fall back, lantern skidding across the ground. The glass shatters, flame guttering out. The harmonica's next note cuts through the darkness, clear as a bell. I scrape my hand across the barn's outside wall, fingertips tracing nails in the boards. One nail holds a scrap of cloth, the faded lace of Eliza's dress, threaded with that same monogrammed handkerchief. I pull it free, dust drifts from it in motes, I press it to my face, taste of mothball tang and sorrow. I hear the horses behind me. Their soft whicker jolts me. I yank my revolver free, aim at the barn door. "Show yourself," I croak, voice raw. I'm done guessing. The night stretches. Just the wind rattles the boards. Then a rustling inside. Quiet, yet certain. Something shifts near the rafters. I grip the lantern handle with my teeth and cock the hammer. The stairs to the loft creak. I reach, find the latch, push the door. The floor groans under weight. I shine the lamp above me. Empty loft except for scattered hay and a broken harmonica. It lies on the boards, mouthpiece cracked, reed bent. My pulse thunders. I drop the light to scoop up the harmonica, pressing my ear to its cracked body. Nothing but my own ragged breathing echoes inside. I rise to leave, but find the barn door firmly closed, jam wedged as if from the inside. I wrench at the handle. It doesn't budge. My fingers slip on the metal. The harmonica's single note shimmers again, softer this time, sweeter. I spin, light quavering, searching the moonlit yard, no figure there. The track beyond the well is empty. I slam my shoulder into the door. Wood cracks. I kick again. The barn rattles. The note turns urgent. Minor scale ascending. Da, da, da. My heart lurches. I swallow, mouth dry, and grab a heavy piece of timber from the hay. I heft it and swing at the door. The board splinters. Top rail gives. I thrust in, vault through the gap and dash outside. The night air hits me. The horses bolt, panic in their eyes. Bertha whinnies, stamping. I holster the revolver, drop the timber, and sprint to the corral. The lantern lies shattered in the yard, its embers cold. I mount Bertha with shaking legs, brushing hay from my chaps. The horses neigh, hoofbeats ringing in the dark. I kick Bertha forward, saddle creaking, and we burst from the homestead into the open plain. Behind me, I hear the harmonica one last time, soft, fading, as though carried off on the wind. Then silence, so deep it smothers me. I lean low over Bertha's withers, urging her faster, faster, until the homestead is a dark speck against the horizon. The night sky swirls overhead. The earth flies past in black and silver. I don't know where we ride, only that we must. Only that the debts of memory chase me beyond these empty ruins, and they will not rest until I settle every score. I press my heels into Bertha's flanks, riding hard until the world blurs into ridges of shadow and faint outlines of mesquite clusters. We thunder across sandy soil where tumbleweeds skitter like frantic ghosts, and the canyon walls recede into brush-choked knolls. My lungs burn, but I force each breath into measured rhythmic pulls. Inhale, exhale, letting the horse's pulse guide my own. The harmonica's tune feels buried now, but every so often I swear the wind whistles through the saddle horn in that same minor key, a memory rattling in the leather. Dawn creeps in pale smears of rose and lavender, but I won't trust sunlight yet. Not until I've found solid ground beneath my boots again. I spur Bertha north, following a wash that carves a winding path through the Badlands. Here, the earth runs, broken and bleached. Gnarled juniper roots twist through chalk-white clay, and the stones lie slick with mica, glittering like pinpricks of starlight. Horses slip on these slick shards. I lean back in the saddle, shifting my weight, guiding Bertha through each hollow and crest. The sky brightens, and at last I see the ragged outline of the railroad siding far below, cindered ties half buried in driftwood sand, tracks that vanish toward distant smokestacks. I could circle back, call for help, but the ledger's warning echoes. They're coming. Someone, or something, is weaving this tapestry of hauntings, and I'm part of the pattern now. The only way out is forward. I slow my mount and let her graze on brittle scrub, pulling the harmonica from its pocket. I cradle it in my calloused hand, pressing a fingertip against the cracked mouthpiece. No breath escapes. The reed lies bent, as though crushed by an invisible hand. I lift it to my lips, half expecting a note, but the hollow metal only echoes my own ragged inhale. I pocket it, resolve hardening in my gut. I ride on. By mid-morning, the canyon opens onto a plateau scattered with the carcasses of juniper and forgotten homesteads. Broken windmills creak in the breeze, turning rusted veins that groan like dying beasts. I guide Bertha toward a hulking silhouette clinging to the edge of a mesa. An old dynamite shack used by surveyors decades gone. The door sags, gaping like a mouth. I tie my horse to the wheel of a stalled pump and ease inside, lantern raised. The shack's interior is suffused with the acrid tang of old explosives, a chemical bitterness that stings my nostrils. Wooden crates stamped "Caution Nitro" stand in neat rows, lids pried open, empty. Walls lined with coil springs and timbers show claw-like gouges, as if something far larger than man tore through the planking. Dust motes hang thick in each beam of lantern light, and the floor is a patchwork of cracked boards and splintered planks. I step, cautious, each footfall a thunderclap. In the far corner, I find footprints pressed in the sawdust, bare soles and boot heels, overlapping, endless. They circle the room twice, leading to a small trapdoor in the floor. The hinges are locked with a rusted padlock, but the hasps broken, bent back as though forced. I kneel, brace my shoulder against the door and shove. It yields with a groan. I leap back as it swings open, darkness yawning below. I feel the harmonica's pull in my coat pocket, a tug at my spine. I retrieve it and cast its silver body down the hatch. It clatters on wooden beams, then silence. I peer into the gaping hole. Faint scuffs mark a ladder's rungs descending into black. My heart stumbles. This was never part of the guidebooks. No mention of a secret cellar or miner's cache. Just a bare shack on the rim, abandoned for years. Yet here lies a hidden shaft. I leave the lantern at the top rung, drawing my revolver. I grip the ladder with one hand, the gun in the other, steps echoing hollow on wood. The air grows cooler, damp with the stink of earth. I reach the bottom and step onto packed clay. Darkness presses in, but I see a faint glow from my lantern above, painting jagged shapes on rough-hewn walls. A dozen crates line the shaft's walls, more explosive canisters. Cobwebs drape each support beam. I sweep the revolver slowly, eyes scanning for movement. Then I hear it. A whisper, too soft to make sense, drifting around the cavern. Voices overlapping, pleading, "Find me, help me." The syllables swirl like dust in the air, impossible to trace. My jaw clenches. I fire a warning shot into the floor. The report rings, echoing up the shaft. Silence follows. A deeper silence than before. Suffocating. The only answer is the skitter of rats retreating into cracks. I shuffle forward, boots stirring fine clay. Near the back wall, I find scratches etched into stone. Tally marks. 8 rows, each 25 deep. 40 names carved beside them, letters worn smooth. I lean close, tracing one. Elizarruth. Below it, Carterhays. My blood chills. Someone has carved my name here. Someone who knows me knows too much. A sudden clatter above rattles my spine. I spin, revolver raised, but the ladder is empty. The lantern's beam swings, revealing a patch of floor where fresh footprints rest. 2 small prints, bare, toes curled. They lead away from the ladder to a narrow corridor carved at the back of the shaft, one I hadn't seen before. I follow, heart loud, every nerve thrumming. The corridor slopes down, walls slick with moisture. I pause at the lip of another drop. Below, a subterranean chamber, the size of a small room, lit by shafts of sunlight from a diamond-shaped hole overhead. Wooden beams support a grated platform. On the floor lies another horseshoe, identical to the one I've collected 4 times now, each gleaming as though polished. I step toward it, breath catching in my throat. Then a voice booms behind me, deep, resonant. "You should not have come here." I whip around. A man stands in shadow. Tall, lean, brim of a battered hat hiding his face. His coat flaps in a breeze I can't feel. In one hand, he holds a harmonica, mouthpiece glinting. He raises it, calm as sunrise. The chamber fills with the low drone of that minor key. I swivel on my heel, gun firing blind. The shot thuds into wood, bursts of splintered timber raining down. He doesn't flinch. The harmonica's tune swells. I feel it in my chest like an avalanche, pushing me forward. My boots slip on damp earth as I scramble back toward the ladder. My revolver clicks empty. I grip my hip, realizing I drew a blank. He advances a step, the echo of his boot fall like a proclamation. The horseshoe at my feet pulses with a dim glow. He stops just beyond the wash of lantern light obscured in shadow. He lifts the harmonica to his lips and plays a single note so pure it splits the air. My bones rattle. I scramble onto the ladder, heart a drum. I won't turn back. I climb with hands shaking, breath ragged. Above me, the platform buckles under stray debris, but holds. I burst into the shack, lunging at the hatch. It slams, shut behind me, trapping him below. I throw my weight against it. It rattles but won't budge. I slide the padlock free, lift the door, and leap out. Bertha whinnies, sensing my panic. I mount, spurs biting, and gallop north, leaving the shack and its secrets behind in a tumble of dust and fading echoes. As Bertha's hooves thunder across the flats, I glance back once. The shack stands empty, silent, no sign of the man or the harmonica. Yet I feel his presence clinging to the earth, a memory carved into every rail and stone. The sun dips low, and the sky turns blood orange. I know I must keep riding, keep searching for a way to end this debt. Because the voices in the earth won't rest until I've faced the maker of this tune. I kick Bertha into a gallop under the pale morning sky, her hooves drumming the earth as I chase down the trail that veers east of the dynamite shack. My lungs burn with each breath, but the ache steels my resolve. Whatever lay beneath those boards, whoever that shadowed man was, draws breath from the same wind that trails across these plains. I swear I can still hear the harmonica's final note humming in my bones, a siren's call I can't outrun. The Sunridge Pass narrows here, channeling the wind into a high-pitched keening that rattles the stirrups. I lean forward, reins loose, letting Bertha find her stride on the slick clay. The canyon walls press close, pinching daylight into a ribbon overhead. Scrub oak and mesquite crowd the trail's edges. Rocks the color of rust blot the ground. I pass a rusted sign, "Beware, unstable cliffs," faded to illegibility years ago. I roll past it without slowing, boots and bones humming with unease. Halfway up the pass, I rein in. Sweat pools beneath my collar. I lean over Bertha's neck, letting her breathe. Around us, the wind settles to a haunted hush, like the sky itself is holding its breath. I slide from the saddle and run a hand along the canyon wall, cool sandstone etched by centuries of rushing water. The echoes of that hidden cellar resonate here, as though every grain of sand is recalling the cave's darkness. I mount again and press on, following ancient wagon ruts that zigzag the steep grade. The higher I climb, the thinner the air feels, each breath a shallow reminder of life's fragility. Then Bertha stumbles on loose shale, nearly pitching me forward. I catch the horn and hold steady. I dismount again, wipe the sweat from my brow, and examine her front left hoof. A small gash, fresh, oozing crimson. I curse under my breath, rip a strip of cloth from my shirt, and wrap her hoof, knotting it tight. She stands patiently, eyes soft. I pat her flank. "Good girl," I murmur. Back in the saddle, I crest the pass. Before me stretches the painted desert, swaths of orange, mauve, and gray undulating beneath a sun that's climbed closer to noon. The trail winds between buttes shaped like ancient totems. I spot movement at the base of the nearest mesa. A hunter's snare, maybe? Slow, I ease Bertha down the slope, boots digging into the shale. Below, carved into the rock face beyond the snare, I see it. Another message scrawled in charcoal, half erased by wind and rain. "You can't hide." My stomach twists. I trot forward, approaching the carving. Closer, the words sharpen, crude lettering and shaky lines, but unmistakable. Underneath, a tally of 39 marks, one short of the ledger's 40 lines. One name missing, one debt unpaid. Fingers trembling, I trace the final tally. Fresh charcoal smudges beneath my fingertips. I look north, where a shaft of sunlight strikes a lone cactus, its silhouette quivering. A flutter of movement catches my eye, a scrap of white fabric snagged on a spike. Eliza's lace again, torn ragged. My heart pounds. Before I can react, a pebble tumbles down the slope, clinking against stone. I whirl, hand on my revolver, but see nothing. The wind has stirred, and with it carries a low breath. That same whisper from the cellar. "Find me." It trails off as if swallowed by the desert. I swallow, voice tight. "I'm looking," I call to the endless sky. I press deeper into the painted desert, following a faint trail that skirts the edge of a sandstone canyon. The walls rise in striated towers, shadows deep as midnight. My boots echo on the hardpan as I lead Bertha, lantern slung at my side. The hoof prints beside mine are fresh, bare, and booted, intertwined in erratic loops. My breath catches at the memory of that hidden chamber. I follow the prints until they vanish into a narrow crevice, barely wide enough for a man. I dismount and guide Bertha past, then crouch at the entrance. Inside the crevice, the air tastes of damp stone and ancient rot. My lantern flares against the walls, revealing petroglyphs, rudimentary figures of riders and beasts, hands raised in supplication. Below them, tally marks carved deep, spiraling downward like a twisted timeline. Each line feels alive under the flicker of light. I run a finger along one set, 2 marks crossed out crudely. My pulse races. Someone struck through 2 debts, marked them as closed. Which names were cut away, which stories ended. I move deeper, the passage narrowing until I must crawl. My revolver's muzzle bumps every few inches. I whisper to Bertha behind me, though she's out there uncertain in the daylight. The tune in my mind, minor key, slow tempo, warms into a melody that almost feels like memory. I recall nights by my own campfire, the harmonica drifting from unseen lips. How long have I tracked this tune? Months? Years? At the far end of the crevice, the crawl space opens into a shallow cave. There, in the center, sits a rock pedestal, crude and circular. On it, a tarnished tin box, hinged and locked. The box's surface is pitted, the clasp rusted. I unsnap my belt and wrap the leather strap around the lid, tugging it free. The box comes open with a squeal of forgotten hinges. Inside lies a single photograph, sepia-toned, curled at the edges. It shows a family. A man in a stovepipe hat, arms around a young woman and a girl no older than 6. The faces are familiar. I know that man's stern jaw, the woman's proud tilt of her head. My head spins. I lift the photograph. On the back, scrawled in faded ink, "Our debts are your debts, E.R." My breath hitches. I slide the photo into my vest pocket. Beneath it, the tin box's bottom is coated with dirt and what looks like dried powder. I sniff. It smells of tobacco and sorrow. I turn to leave, but freeze. The cave entrance is closed. Smooth stone where the passage should be. My lantern light strikes the wall. The rock has shifted, sealing me in. Panic floods my senses. I pound the wall with my fist. Nothing. My revolver clicks empty as I press the butt against the stones, but the earth barely trembles. The harmonica's refrain begins again, soft, haunting, emanating from the darkness behind me. A breath, a note, a promise that this cavern is alive. I drop to my knees, searching the cave floor by lantern light. The tin photograph slipped into my pocket, but the box remains. Empty now, save for bits of lead that crumble beneath my fingers. I scoop the fragments into my hand. Pencil lead, cracked and fragile. Tally marks in charcoal, crushed to dust. The debt of 40 is now fractured. One unfinished life. One missing name. A slow scrape echoes from the cavern's rear wall. I whirl, lantern trembling. A seam has opened, cracked fissures weaving like spider webs across the stone. Pale light seeps through. Dawn's rays spilling into the gloom. As the seam widens, a figure steps forward, wrapped in tattered cloth, harmonica in hand. I draw the revolver, voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" The figure halts, lifting the harmonica to its lips. The cavern fills with that minor key lament once more, a melody of sorrow and accusation that feels carved into the land itself. I stand, chest tight, revolver pointed, but my hands shake too much to fire. As the figure advances, every eye in the desert, every whispered plea in the wind seems to turn toward me. The morning light found me riding out of that hidden cavern as if waking from a fevered dream. My reins were slack, Bertha's gait steady, though her flanks heaved with each breath. I carried the tin box and photograph against my chest, the paper crinkling beneath my fingers. I didn't dare open my mouth. The canyon walls felt watchful, as if every echo lingered too long. The plateau beneath the Sunridge Pass stretched before me, baked clay cracking under the rising sun. I guided Bertha toward the broken wagon track that led north, away from the painted desert, away from secret caverns and tally-marked walls. We rode in silence, the only sound our own rhythms. Hoofbeats thudding the earth, leather straps creaking as Bertha shifted her weight, my own heart pounding against ribs softened by years of solitude. The photograph burned against my coat, that family's faces staring back at me as though accusing. I pressed a thumb against the girl's smiling cheek, her eyes bright, without a hint of sorrow. I clenched my fist, bone-deep sorrow blooming in my chest. "Eliza Ruth," I whispered. Our debts. Our debts." By midday, we reached the old cattle trail where the brush opened into scattered grasslands. The wind picked up, stirring dust devils that whisked across the ground like playful spirits. I slowed Bertha, letting her graze, and scanned the horizon for any sign of pursuit. None came. Only the glimmer of distant mesas, the sun's glare shimmering on empty plains. I dismounted and walked beside my mount, cupping the photograph to shield it from the breeze. A bead of sweat rolled down my temple, salt and grit stinging my eye. I thought of the ledger in that way station, the tally of debts carved into dusty pages. 40 names, 40 lives tethered to my own by choices I made long ago. 40 debts counting down like minutes on a watch. One name missing. One life unresolved. And now, this photograph, this tiny clue left in a hidden desert vault. It told me that family mattered, that their promise, scrawled on the back with Eliza's shaky hand, was the final line in that ledger. Our debts are your debts. The words echoed like a vow. I pressed the photo tighter, the paper creasing under my grip. I remounted and urged Bertha north, toward the distant silhouette of an abandoned mining town called Gravestone Ridge. Once a bustling outpost for silver prospectors, now a ghostly row of boardwalks and boarded-up storefronts. I'd heard rumors that a handful of families still lived there, eking out a living by farming scrub grain or running a lonely trading post. Perhaps someone there could help me piece together whose faces I'd seen in that photograph, and whose debts I was meant to repay. The trail to Gravestone Ridge wound through a narrow wash, the cliffs on either side towering like ancient pillars. Shadows lay heavy in the crevices, and the hush felt deeper than any midday silence should be. Bertha picked her way carefully, hooves slipping on slick clay, and I let her lead. I fingered the horseshoe in my pocket, its iron curve cold against my palm. 4 horseshoes so far, each appearing in places it should never have been. Cabin door, bunkhouse wall, homestead barn, dynamite shack. Each a summons to continue the hunt, to keep searching. I tensed, half expecting hoofbeats behind me, but the wash remained empty. At the mouth of the wash, I stopped. The sun blazed overhead, and the air shimmered. Not a soul stirred. I shaded my eyes and peered toward the ridge. The rooftops and lean-tos of Gravestone Ridge lay scattered over a slope of red stones. A plume of smoke drifted from one chimney. Someone must be home. I kicked Bertha forward, and we climbed the wash's pass. By mid-afternoon, we reached the town's boardwalk. The planks creaked under Bertha's weight. A handful of buildings lined the street. A saloon with broken windows, its swinging doors warped and hanging by one hinge. A blacksmith shop, the anvil still inside, pocked with rust. A general store, its shutters closed tight. I tied Bertha to a hitching post outside the trading post, where a painted sign read, M. Calhoun and Sons, Provisions and Supplies. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. I stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the sunlight filtering through cracks around the door. Behind the counter stood a lean man with graying hair and a lined face, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked up, eyes wary. "Afternoon," I said, throat tight. "Name's Hayes, Carter Hayes. I'm looking for some information." He studied me. "Lot of folk pass through here," he drawled. "Not many stay long." He leaned on the counter, rag silent. "What information you want?" I pulled the photograph from my vest, sliding it across the counter. The man's eyes widened. He reached out, touch hesitating. "Where'd you get this?" I shrugged. "Found it in a tin box under a desert shack. Wanted to know who they are." "Family?" His hand trembled as he picked up the photo, fingers tracing the edges. I cleared my throat. "You know them?" He tucked the rag into his belt. "That's the Rutherford family. Samuel Rutherford, his wife Eliza, and their daughter Clara. Old mine owners around these parts. Built this town 20 years back." He dropped the photo, leaning back. "They left when the silver ran dry, packed up and disappeared. Folks said they went east, chasing some scheme. Never heard from 'em again." My heart thudded. "Do you know where east?" He shook his head. "Could be anywhere. They had kin in Kansas, maybe Colorado. Hard to say. They kept to themselves after the mine closed. Sold most of their claim to a company out of Prescott. That was 15 years ago." He sighed. "Funny thing. Few here miss 'em. Eliza wasn't one for kindness. Heard she ran that mine with iron fists." His gaze sharpened. "But Clara was always sweet, bright-eyed, talkative. Folks liked her. I nodded, mind racing. "Thank you," I said. I slid the photograph back. He pocketed it. "Be careful who you ask," he said quietly. "Rutherford name carries weight. Folks remember old grudges." I stepped out into the harsh light, the sun's heat pressing down. I patted Bertha's neck, voice low. "All right, girl." "We're chasing ghosts east." I swung into the saddle, dust swirling at my boots. The harmonica melody whispered in my memory, minor key rising, full of promise and threat. I turned my mount toward the trail that led east, toward the unknown towns where the Rutherfords might have settled. As we left Gravestone Ridge, the smoke plume from that solitary chimney drifted like a farewell, a hush on a stage set too long for any audience. The boards creaked behind us, leaving the town as silent as when we arrived. My mind churned with possibilities. Kansas farmland, Colorado mining camps, even Missouri settlements. I'd follow the Rutherford Trail across counties, across state lines, until I found them, or until the desert itself claimed me, because debts left unpaid breed vengeance, and debts born of blood and memory demand reckoning. The sun dipped westward as we rode, stretching our shadows long across the plains. Each step took me farther into my past, deeper into a story I thought I'd finished, only to find its final lines waiting in hidden vaults and tumble-down towns. The winds shifted, carrying a scent of wood smoke and sagebrush. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of that photograph and the ledger's tally merging in my chest. I don't know if I'll find the Rutherfords. I don't even know if they'll want to be found. But I'm bound by that ledger, by Eliza's promise scrawled in ink and charcoal, to ride whatever miles it takes. I rode east through the late afternoon light, the plains unfolding beneath a sky bruised by clouds that threatened rain. The photograph of the Rutherfords lay folded in my vest pocket, its edges softened by days of handling. I traced each face in my mind, Samuel's stern gaze, Eliza's clenched jaw, Clara's gentle smile, and wondered which one had marked that tin box with her promise. The ledger's tally still pulsed in my memory, the charcoal lines insisting that every name be honored. I leaned low over Bertha's neck, following a faint animal track that cut across the scrub grass toward a dry riverbed. The riverbed itself was bone dry, cracked clay splitting under our hooves. I dismounted to lead the horses along the bank, wary of hidden holes that might break a leg. In the wash, I found clues. Hoof prints half buried by wind, footprints too small for a man but too large for a child. They wove together in a restless dance, as though whoever walked here had paused often, looking over their shoulder. I knelt, brushing the dust aside, and uncovered a single bolt from a harness, its steel tarnished and etched with a tiny R. I tucked it into my pocket alongside the horseshoe and the photograph, 3 talismans of a trail I'd scarcely begun to follow. We remounted when the sky grew slate gray, the promise of rain sending swallows skimming low over the plains. I set a course for a scatter of farmsteads I'd spotted on the horizon, tilled fields and windmills that suggested families eking out a living far from town. If the Rutherfords had kin, I figured they might gravitate toward homesteading, trading silver ambitions for the steadier promise of soil and sweat. By dusk, I glimpsed fence lines and barn silhouettes. I guided Bertha down a rutted path. Her ears pricked as she picked through the mud. At the first farmhouse, a 2-room shack with peeling whitewash and a crooked porch, I tied my horse to a fallen post and approached the front door. It hung slightly ajar. I pushed inside, lantern raised, and found the interior lit by a single oil lamp. A woman sat by a table, her back to me, stirring a pot of stew on a tiny stove. She looked up when I cleared my throat. "Evening, ma'am," I said softly. Name's Carter Hayes. I've been following some family history. Rutherford, by any chance? Her spoon froze midair. She wasn't old, maybe in her 30s, but her shoulders sagged under a lifetime's worth of burdens. She set the spoon down and wiped her hands on her apron. Rutherford, you from the railroad town? I nodded and slid the photograph across the table. Her eyes welled as she recognized the faces. That's Samuel and Eliza, my great-aunt and uncle, and that's my cousin Clara. Her voice trembled. Where'd you get this? I told her of the cavern beneath the dynamite shack, the ledger, the tally marks. She rose, hands trembling, and backed me toward a window. Outside, the first raindrops splashed against the ground, hissing on the dry dirt. She pointed north, ever so slightly. You need to go to Blackthorn Ridge. We left when the silver dried up, but Grandfather made his homestead there first. My pa lived out toward the old mine shaft sealed for years. That's where they buried the debts. I swallowed. Blackthorn Ridge was 2 days' ride through hills gnawed by water, and rife with stories of ghostly miners. Think I'll find them there? Her gaze flicked to the lantern's flame, to the shadows dancing on the wall. It's where it all began, she whispered, and where it all ends. I thanked her and stepped back into the damp twilight, urged Bertha forward, and followed the path she indicated. The rain came down in earnest as we climbed onto the ridge's foothills, slipping through mud and low-hanging branches. The thunder rumbled like a warning shot. I kept going, boots heavy, reins slick in my grip. Night fell before I reached the old mine entrance, an arched opening propped with splintered timber and draped in vines that stewed in the rain. The horses balked, stamping and whinnying in the gloom. I tied them to an iron ring set in the rock, lit my lantern, and approached. The air at the mouth of the mine was colder, smelling of earth and rot. I swept my gaze across the timbers, the mine's name, Iridescent Vein, carved deep into a beam overhead. I stepped inside. My lantern's glow revealed a shaft sloping downward, rails half buried in silt. Water dripped from the ceiling, conjuring diamonds on the tracks. As I advanced, I saw tally marks scrawled on the support posts, rows of 40 across every beam, each accompanied by a name, some familiar, others not. I pressed my glove to one set, old Jesse Long, Helen Whitlock, my own name right beside them. But at the end of one row, where Clara's name should have been, the mark was fresh, deeper than the rest, as though carved moments ago. My throat tightened. I traced the groove with a fingertip. Charcoal smudge under my nail. I stepped deeper, the lantern trembling in my hand. I passed carts tipped on their sides, ore buckets still chained to cables. The echo of dripping water sounded like distant footsteps. Then I heard it. The harmonica's stray note, tinny and hollow, carried along the rails. My heart slammed against my ribs. I holstered my revolver and followed the sound, each footfall stirring dust. Further in, I reached a cavernous chamber, an old processing room where ore used to be crushed under iron wheels. Now the machinery lay silent, rusted gears frozen in time. The harmonica's note lingered near a set of tracks that led to a side tunnel black as midnight. I swallowed and stepped onto the rails, lantern held high. The side tunnel sloped up, its walls grooved with pick marks. I climbed, feeling the earth tighten around me. At the top, I found a block door, reinforced with steel straps, rust eating at the hinges. The harmonica's note rang out again from the other side, clear and haunting. I pressed my shoulder to the door and shoved. It swung open with a groan. Beyond lay a small chamber lit by phosphorescent fungus that dotted the walls in ghostly green. In the center stood a wooden table, and on it the harmonica, resting on a folded piece of linen stained with ink. I stepped forward, breath catching. The linen bore a message in Eliza's hand. Only the living can repay this debt. Beneath it lay a single photograph fragment, Clara's face torn away from the rest. My lantern light trembled as I reached for the harmonica. The moment my fingers closed around it, the ground beneath me shuddered. Dust fell from the ceiling, and a low moan reverberated through the tunnel. I stumbled back, lantern smashing against the fungus-streaked wall. The harmonica clanged on the table. I spun, heart pounding, to race back to the mine entrance, but found the block door slammed shut, steel groaning locked. The rails behind me began to vanish into darkness as the tunnel contracted, walls closing in. The fungus pulsed around me, a living heartbeat in stone. I raised my lantern for one last look at the table, the fragment of Clara's face staring back, her eyes alive with lingering sorrow. I forced myself to breathe as the tunnel's walls closed around me, fungus flickering on stone like dying embers. The chamber's darkness pressed in so tight I felt its weight in my bones. Between the green glint of fungus and the faint lantern glow, I saw the fragment of Clara's face, half hidden beneath layers of dust. Her eyes stared back at me, alive with anguish. I raised my lantern, and the beam caught the tarnished harmonica on the table, its reeds bent but still gleaming with promise. I gripped the harmonica and pressed it to my lips, half hoping for a note to guide me out. Instead, it lay cold and mute in my hand, echoing the cavern silence. My breath fogged the lantern glass as I set it down, revolver clenched in one fist, harmonica in the other. The walls trembled, subtle at first, then rattling loose grains of stone like rain. Footsteps echoed behind me, soft booted beats that fell in time with the harmonica's absent melody. I spun toward the far wall where the side tunnel led back to the main shaft. It yawned wide now, gaping like a wound in earth, beckoning me into its depths. I took a step forward, and the floor gave way beneath my boots. I tumbled through darkness, lantern flying from my grip, splintering as it fell. My revolver clattered off the stone. I landed hard on slick clay, breath knocked from my lungs, head spinning. Stars of vertigo pulsed in my vision as I scrambled to my knees. My knuckles ached against the cold ground. I rolled onto my back and saw that I'd fallen into a narrow fissure, a natural fault line running beneath the mine. The roof arched overhead, only a hand's width above my head. The air smelled of wet stone and something fouled. Old blood, or fear, pressed so deep into rock it can't wash away. I fumbled in my coat for the harmonica fragment. The reeds bit into my palm like barbs. I pressed my lips together to stanch the bleeding. Then, a rasping breath echoed from above. I lifted my head and found the entrance blocked by a shape. A man hunched in, the fissure's mouth, silhouette outlined by alien green light. His hat brim dipped too low, his shoulders hunched like smoke before it rises. In his hand, he held not the harmonica I carried, but a second one, identical, undented, its finish unmarked by dust or time. He lifted it to his lips and played a single note, a minor key that cut through the dark like a blade. The sound quivered, then multiplied, as if the cave itself sang through every crevice. My heart thundered in response, echo against echo until I felt the walls pulse, alive with that mournful refrain. I tried to speak, but my throat seized. The man's breath rattled the harmonica's reed. Da, 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 da. With each note, the fissure's wall seemed to breathe outward, expanding, inviting me farther in. I felt a pull in my gut, as though some ancient current beneath the earth beckoned me to join it. I raised a shaking hand toward him. "Who are you?" I rasped. He paused, note lingering like a question. Then he set the harmonica aside and reached into his coat. In his palm lay a ledger, the same bound pages I'd seen in the way station, its cover worn unrecognizable. He opened to a fresh page and pointed at the tally beneath Carter Hayes. The mark beside my name had 2 slashes now, crossed out. Next to it, a single, trembling line. The 7th debt. My breath hitched. 6 slashes meant 6 debts. 6 places I'd seen the horseshoe, 6 names carved in stone. This 7th line meant one final reckoning. I swallowed. Vision narrowed to the ledger's page and the man's unseen face. He closed the book with a soft snap and held it out. "You've paid 6, he said, voice dry as dust. "But this last debt, it belongs to you." I shook my head, chest tight. "I don't understand. I've honored every name, every soul. Yet this ledger persists." He lifted the harmonica again, this time the cracked one from the table, and placed it in my outstretched hand. "Then you know what to do." His hat brim lifted slightly, revealing a sliver of pale skin, but no eyes, only shadow. "Play it." The chamber pulsed with expectation. The harmonica felt warm in my palm, reed humming with potential. I lifted it, pressed my lips against the mouthpiece, and drew breath. The note welled inside me, soft, trembling, fraught with memory. My mind flooded with voices. Clara's laughter, Eliza's rebuke, the old man's whispered plea. Each summoned a freight of guilt and regret. I exhaled, and the harmonica sang, "Da, da, da." The cave walls shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling in glowing motes, swirling like spectral fireflies. The ledger, suspended in the man's hand, fluttered open, pages turning of their own accord. Each turned page revealed a tally, then a name, then blank space. The final page lay open on an unmarked sheet, the tally yet to be made. He nodded once, as though satisfied. The fissure's walls loosened, cracks widening, light spilling from the maw above. The path back to the mine yawned clear. I felt the pull of solid ground, the promise of dawn, of life beyond debts. But I also felt the ledger's weight in my hand, empty lines waiting to be etched. He stepped back into the darkness behind him, harmonica drifting from his lips like a fading breath. His form dissolved into shadow, leaving only the ledger and the tunnel's yawning promise. The harmonica's note lingered, echoing down the passage, softening to a whisper, then fading entirely. I rose unsteadily, clutching the ledger and harmonica, and turned toward the daylight beyond the mine shaft. The cavern's mouth beckoned, filled with pale morning light. I took a step forward and froze. Across the threshold, etched into the rock face, gleamed a single horseshoe, hammered into the stone as if it had always been there. My breath caught. 6 horseshoes, 7 debts, and now this final mark, ringing like a promise I cannot deny. I swallowed hard, vision stinging with tears of dust and sorrow. The ledger's blank tally page turned in my hand, awaiting my mark. The harmonica lay heavy, reed bent, waiting for my breath. I closed my eyes and listened. Beyond the shaft lay the world, wind in the sage, horses grazing, the sky unspooling across the horizon, and beneath it, the echo of my own heartbeat, ticking down to that final tally. I emerge from the mine shaft into the ashen light of a sky gone cold and warbling with distant thunder. The desert around Blackthorn Ridge stretches before me like an endless canvas of cracked clay and thornbush. No track to mark my passage, no sentinel rock to bear witness. In my fist, I clutch the ledger and the cracked harmonica, their weight both anchor and chain. The rain begins in a hiss of cold droplets, each one a needle pricked to the skin, and I lift my face to let the desert's tears wash the dust from my cheeks. Bertha shifts beneath me, nostrils flaring to taste the storm. I pat her neck, murmuring soft thanks for her steadiness. Behind us, the mine's mouth yawns open, dark and empty now, its tangle of rails and rotting timbers half swallowed by wind-blown sand. I close my eyes, listening for that minor key lament that has guided me here, but only the thunder replies. I hitch the ledger to my belt and remove the harmonica, pressing its cold reeds to my lips. My fingers shake as I raise it, and for a moment I hesitate. 2 breaths of silence, 2 heartbeats of doubt. Then I draw inward, filling my lungs with storm-slaked air, and exhale into the harmonica. The note emerges ragged at first, an uncertain length, a tremor of regret, but it finds its pitch deep and steady, a minor chord that cracks the hush like lightning across a blackout sky. The sound resonates through the wind-worn buttes, ricocheting off stone until it returns to me multiplied. Echo answering echo, a chorus of every step I've taken. I sink to one knee in the wet clay, harmonica still singing, and let the ledger fall open on my thigh. Page after page shivers in the rain, tally marks smudging into charcoal tears. At the bottom of the final page, 3 lines remain. The first 2 bear my name crossed through, but the third, an empty slash, waiting, expectant. I swallow hard, drawing the rain into my lungs, letting it dilute the bitterness that has gathered there. I press the harmonica again, coaxing a final, lingering note from its rusted body. The world holds its breath. Even the thunder stills. Then, with a rake of lightning that splits the sky, I reach into my vest and draw out the photograph fragment of young Clara Rutherford. Her face is bright against the storm-dark backdrop, her eyes wide with hope. I didn't wait for the rain to cease. With ledger and harmonica stowed, I kicked Bertha into a loping canter down the slick clay arroyo. Each hoofbeat drummed against my ribs, reminders that life still throbbed beneath this skin, despite the debts I'd just paid. The sky peeled open in bruised purples and fading amber. Storm clouds skittered east, chasing the dying light. My mind churned with the weight of that final tally. Clara's name etched beside mine, the last line no longer empty but bleeding ink into the paper. By the time the arroyo opened onto the high plain, darkness had begun to gather. The wind dropped away, leaving a hush so total it felt like standing beneath the earth itself. I reined Bertha to a stop and slid from the saddle, boots sucking in the soft earth. I unfolded the ledger on a flat stone and traced the tally lines with my fingertip. 40 names, 40 lives. Each one accounted for, each debt discharged. I exhaled, watching spirals of breath rise into the chill air. I lifted the harmonica and pressed it once more to my lips. The desert held its breath. I drew in a slow, steady breath and blew, one long wavering note that rolled out across the plain like a ripple over still water. The sound bent against distant hills and returned to me hollow, echoing across the expanse. Then all went silent again, as though the world were swallowing the sound, hiding it in the space between heartbeats. I stood there a while, ledger open in hand, letting the silence settle around me. Pain and relief warred in my chest. Relief that the tally was complete. Pain for the journey behind me and the memories I'd had to confront. The photograph of Clara, tucked into the ledger's pages, felt heavier now, as if it carried her final sorrow and hope both. A single tear smeared the ink, smudging the slash beside her name into a blurry line. I refolded the ledger with care and slipped it back into my coat. Then I strapped it to Bertha's saddlebag, alongside the photograph and a pair of worn spurs. my own, removed so many miles ago when I first sought solitude. The horse's flank brushed mine as I remounted, as if urging me onward. I tightened my grip on the reins and urged Bertha east, toward whatever horizon lay beyond. The first stars winked awake in the velvet sky. The Milky Way spilled above like a ribbon of bone-white dust. I rode in silence, guided by starlight and the soft glow of ledger-bound moonlight on the plains. For a time, there was nothing but the steady rhythm of my horse and the gentle whisper of wind through the scrub. The debts were paid. The ledger lay closed, its pages weighed down by the final slash. Yet, as I crested a low rise, I glimpsed something that froze my blood. A lone figure standing against the skyline, backlit by a tremor of moonlight. Hat brim low, silhouette impossibly still. In one hand, he held the harmonica I'd used to seal those debts. In the other, a single horseshoe, fresh, unweathered iron glinting in the starlight. He tipped the harmonica to his lips and played one last trembling note, a minor chord that fractured the night. I didn't hear it with my ears, but felt it inside my bones, a summons more insistent than any ledger's tally. His head lifted, and I saw a flash of movement at the edge of his coat, a scrap of Eliza's lace drifting like a phantom memento. I blinked, and the figure was gone, vanished into the darkness in a breath. Only the harmonica's final echo remained, folding into the rustle of night grasses and the low nicker of my horse. The horseshoe lay at my feet, exactly where he'd dropped it, spelling out a word in the mud, "Begin." I swept the horseshoe into my pouch and rose in the stirrups. The horizon beckoned with promise and peril alike, new debts to reckon, unfinished stories waiting in distant towns, and the haunting truth that some ledgers never truly close. I reckon the night I first heard Slim's fiddle drifting across the mesa was the same night everything began to twist into something I'd never reckon how to set straight again. I'd bedded down under the old cottonwood, Daisy's breath steamy in the cold desert air, and my rifle leaned against the post, ready if rattlers stirred or coyotes crept too bold. The scrub rattled under the high tide of wind. Sagebrush leaves whispered like dry tongues. I chewed the stub of my cigar in silence, staring up at a sky so wide it felt like a weight crushing down. Slim had promised he'd join me before 10. He'd borrowed a neighbor's fiddle, said he'd learned some haunting tune that'd send chills through a man's bones. But when the hour passed and the moon climbed higher, I thought him late, which suited me fine. I liked the quiet shifts on the trail, the world reduced to the hiss of the fire, and the thrum in my own chest. Each beat was a promise that tomorrow I could ride out, chase down one more herd, find one more stretch of horizon to call my own. Then I heard it. A single note, bowed soft and trembling, floating out of the brush about 50 yards off. It stopped. I frowned, sat up, and spat ash into the dirt. The note hadn't been music. It had been something else, like the land itself letting out a sigh. I called, voice low, "Slim?" Nothing. Just the wind shaking the cottonwood limbs overhead. I stood and held the rifle at port arms, legs steady. The note sounded again, 2 notes now, quavering through the darkness. "Slim," I said once more, stepping toward the sound, each footfall muffled by dust and dead grass. The firelight didn't reach that far. By the time I crossed the stretch of moonlit dirt, the music stopped altogether. Only Slim's fiddle lay face down in the sand where the bow had scraped the wood, carving a shallow groove through the paint. I knelt, picked up the instrument. The scroll was gouged, pegs sweet with rust. Whoever'd played it had done more than set bow to string. The fiddle's belly was cracked, hair splayed like a broken animal. I sniffed at the wood. It smelled of smoke and dry leather, and something sour, like the last breath of a dying horse. Heart thumping, I hooked it under my arm and mounted Daisy. My fire smoldered behind me, and I rode back to camp with the fiddle pressed tight against my chest, as though it held some secret I might bleed out through my palms. By the time I reached the bunkhouse, the others were stirring, rubbing their eyes. I draped the fiddle over a nail by the door, dust flaking down. I said nothing of the notes I'd heard. Slim bound up before dawn every day. I figured he must have gone off early to practice by moonlight. I stuck my rifle by the door and crawled into my bedroll, but sleep never came. I lay staring at the ceiling, listening for the scrape of bow hair, aching to know if Slim was out there or if something else stood in the brush, mocking me with those hollow tones. Hours passed, and a distant caw of a raven broke the stillness. I rose and stepped outside. The morning sun cast long shadows. The cottonwood's leaves trembled. I walked to the knoll where I'd heard the music, but the fiddle was gone. No sign I'd ever found it at all, save for the faint impression in the dust, like a handprint on a table that's since been wiped clean. My mouth went dry. I traced the spot with my boot. Nothing but bare earth and tufts of grass flattened by the crawl of something heavy. I didn't see Slim all day. At noon, I rode out toward Rabbit's Canyon, hoping to catch his horse grazing or find him by the old water hole. Instead, I found tracks, boot prints, too deep, weaving between rocks as though their maker walked with a limp or hesitation. The prints led away from the canyon and toward flat scarps that ran east. I followed, Daisy picking her way sure-footed. Every so often, the prints vanished in sandy patches, only to reappear yards on. I'd stop and circle the spot, but no trace, no twig snapped, no scuff on the stone. It was as if the boots had only brushed air. Evening settled as I returned, and a low fog crept over the pasture, muffling sound. I called for Slim until my throat stung. No answer. I sat by the fire, the fiddle laid in my lap, fingers tracing the cracked grain. My mind wandered to the empty bunk, the saddle with its too pristine blanket, and I wondered if Slim had ever been here at all. My hand went cold on the fiddle's neck. I glanced up at the twisting shadows and swore a whisper of fiddle music curled through the smoke. But when I uncoiled my head, all I saw was Daisy, sifting hay between her teeth. That night I slept little. I dreamt of a canyon where the walls bled light and echoed 1,000 violins, each note a wail of longing. I woke to the sickly gray of dawn, heart pounding like a runaway horse. I rose, strapped on my belt, and stepped out. The wind lay still. Dawn birds were silent. I rode for the old miner's shack where Slim sometimes lounged. The door hung open. Inside, the scratch of a bow against strings drew me in. I drew my revolver and crept forward. Slim stood in the corner, fiddle tucked beneath his chin, eyes rolled back, playing a tune I recognized but couldn't name. Fingers blurred over the fingerboard, bow flying. His face was pale under sun-bleached wood slats. The song ended, and Slim bolted upright. His eyes met mine, wide, wild. He tilted the fiddle, ran a hand over the crack in the body. "They taught me this one," he said, voice gone ragged, the strings humming under his fingertips. I lowered my revolver. "Who's they?" I asked, but Slim only shook his head. He set the fiddle on the bunk's rough plank and pressed his hand against the wall, as though afraid it might vanish behind him. "I reckon they're out there," he said, eyes flicking to the doorway. "Waiting for me." I grabbed his shoulder. "Then we ride out," I said, but Slim's gaze didn't shift. He stared at the empty doorway, as if someone small and pale stood in the gap, waiting. My breath caught. The doorway framed the morning light, and nothing. But I saw a shape, slender legs, a hat brim low, fade into the morning. Slim's mouth moved. They told me to bring it back. Bring what back? My hand tightened on his arm, but Slim vanished. All I found was the fiddle's bow, hair frayed and sticky at the tip, lying in the dirt, and the front door wide open to a desert that stretched forever, silent and accusing. I left the miner's shack behind, saddle creaking under my weight. I tucked the bow into my coat pocket and rode hard toward home, the wind at my back and a ghost's melody thumping in my skull. Behind me, the shack stood empty, its door yawning like a wound, and the desert swallowed Slim's secrets whole. Now I sit by a new fire, fiddle at my side, pressing my fingers to its strings though no song comes forth. I listen instead for that faint, mournful pitch slipping in from beyond the trees, an invitation or a warning, mingling with the whippoorwill's call. I'm alone again, but I know that quiet is no friend to a man who's heard the dead play in the dark. Slim's fiddle lay silent now, the fire's last embers crackling low in the cold dawn air. I sat for a long minute, watching the smoke curl into the pale sky, wondering if I'd chased ghosts for nothing. But the desert doesn't lie about wishes. It just takes what you offer. So I packed my bedroll, strapped Daisy's saddle, slipped the bow from my pocket, and rode east where the light split the mesas. By noon, I reached the dry wash where Slim and I had chased antelope last spring. The wash lay sun-baked, cracked like old leather. I tethered Daisy to a mesquite, led her down to taste the dusty soil, then set off on foot, tumbleweeds rattling hollow tunes behind me. I stared at the scrub, scanning for signs. Hoof prints, boot prints, a dropped buckle or a coat button, but found nothing. Had Slim walked 1,000 miles and never left a mark? Had the wind scrubbed everything clean? I remembered the first time I met Slim, nearly 20 years past. He was a rangy kid, no more than 20 summers, with a fiddle slung across his back and a grin that promised trouble. I got stuck on his horse one dusk, spooked by a deer, and Slim rode up, helped me untangle my stirrup, then played a tune under the stars that sounded like home. I'd never seen that look in a man's eye since. Equal parts longing and sorrow. I reckoned then he carried something heavier than a fiddle case. That memory flickered as I walked. The canyon walls rose on either side, shadows pooling in the recesses like ink. I followed the wash until it bent north, then climbed a ridge of caliche rock where the wind gnawed at my hat. From this height I could see the prairies stretch, amber grass waving, cattle grazing, and in the distance, the ghostly shape of the miner's shack where I'd last held Slim's hand. My chest tightened. I closed my eyes and heard the bowed strings echo in my head. A sudden clatter made me snap upright, Daisy's neigh as if warning me. I spun, hand on my Colt. There, not 20 yards off, lay Slim's hat, a battered Stetson, brim curled, marked by a smear of sweat and dirt. I approached with slow steps, heart pounding like distant thunder. The hat felt warm to the touch, though the sun blazed overhead. I lifted it. Inside, I found a scrap of paper, folded small, brittle as a desiccated leaf. I opened it and read 2 words scrawled in charcoal. "Come home." No signature, no flourish, just the blunt command. My pulse throbbed. Who'd written it? Slim? A stranger? Something out here in the open? I stared at the horizon, where the prairies met the haze. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was a notion stitched together out of half-remembered lullabies and dust-choked laughs. If I returned with Slim, would the land forgive us? If I left him out here, how long until the desert claimed me too? I heard hoofbeats before I saw them, soft, measured, like the thief of a man I once knew. Daisy whinnied low. I turned. Old Blue emerged from the mesquite, ribs pronounced, head hung low. No rider. My breath caught. I surveyed the brush. No footprints, no stir in the sand. Blue nosed at the ground where the wash narrowed, then walked toward the ridge, as if expecting me to follow. I swung into the saddle, Daisy snorting. Blue stopped at the ridge's lip, looking back at me, eyes dark with some quiet plea. I nudged Daisy forward. Each step creaked the saddle leather. The ridge crest revealed more scrub, then another hinge of ground folding away. Blue circled, leading me deeper into the scrub, where the rocks turned white and chalky. The sun sank past its zenith, heat rippling off the stones. At a bend in the wash, I found them. Rows of stones stacked in circles, half buried, some toppled. A makeshift cairn field, dozens of them, each haphazard at first glance, but together forming a map of intent. The stones rose to shin height, then sprayed downward in concentric rings, creating pit traps and dead ends. I dismounted, heart thrumming. The ground here felt wrong, compressed, as though pounded by boots and hooves that wore no tread. I ran my hand along a cairn's rim. The stones were cold, inexplicably so, though the sun had scorched the land. I glanced around. No juniper or mesquite, just cracked earth and the tall grass bent by a breeze I couldn't feel. A low hum thrummed at my feet. In the center of the nearest ring lay Slim's fiddle, its scroll broken off. Strings snapped. I knelt and laid my palm on its belly. The hum grew louder, like the vibration of a fife playing underwater. Then a single note rang out, clear and unbroken, slicing through my bones. My hand jumped back. The note vibrated across the desert, then multiplied. 2, 3, 4 notes, layered until they formed a chord too sorrowful to name. I looked up. The cairns glowed faintly at their bases, as if the ground itself bled light. Heat waves rippled through the air, making the horizon wobble. The music swelled into a lament, quivering with longing. I raised my Colt, but the sound swallowed the echo of the hammer's click. Daisy stamped and backed away. Old Blue trotted in place, mane lifted like nestatic hair. The stones hummed, sang, voiced some ancient dirge. The desert stilled. The wind, the lizards, the birds, everything hushed to witness that single, terrible harmony. Then the music stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before, pressing in on my mind. The cairns lay inert, drained of that luminous pulse. The fiddle lay still, lifeless. Only the scrap of paper remained in my pocket, reading, "Come home." I turned to Daisy, voice tight. "Did you hear that, girl?" She whickered softly, pressing against my leg. I mounted, chest heaving. Ahead, the path stretched smooth and empty. I rode on, Daisy and Old Blue walking side by side, as though companions bound by some shared burden. The sun dipped low by the time I cleared the cairn field. Twilight cast long shadows that stretched like fingers across the land. I glanced back once. The rings of stones looked innocuous now, innocuous and still. But I knew the desert never forgets its song. It carries it in the stones, in the wind, in the echo of a fiddle played by no one and everyone at once. We reached camp when the first star pricked the sky. The others had built a fresh fire, its glow small against the dark. I tethered my horses and stepped into the circle of light. Slim's bunk lay empty, bedroll folded neat. I set the broken fiddle on the stump by his bunk and unfolded the scrap of paper, letting the wind tease its edges. "Come home," I muttered. But where is home if not here under these stars? Old Hank stirred, spat tobacco, and offered me a tin cup of coffee. The steam swirled like spirits rising. I drank slow, taste bitter as regret. The others exchanged worried glances, but I only nodded and rose, tucking the paper in my coat. I built a small cairn of my own with flat stones by the fire. One ring, half finished, a circle for Slim, for the music, for the emptiness that follows a man who vanishes halfway through a song. I pressed the broken fiddle in its center and left the bow cradled like a flower. That night, I dreamt of a canyon flooded with moonlight, each wave of light carrying a note of music. I stood at the mouth, calling Slim's name, but the canyon answered only in echoes. My own voice carried back, twisted and wan. I woke to the silent desert again. Daisy's breath, the low moan of the wind, and the faintest whisper of strings threading between the mesas. I squinted toward the cairn ring by the bunkhouse. One stone had tumbled loose, lying flat like an invitation. I climbed into the saddle, heart hollow and heavy, and followed where that broken ring pointed. East, ever east, toward a horizon that felt less like an edge and more like a question without an answer. I rode until the moon sank low, the horizon bleeding gray, then dismounted by a cluster of broken rails, half swallowed by tumbleweeds. The wind carried the scent of scorched chaparral mixed with damp earth, like laughter buried beneath rain. I set the broken fiddle against a sun-bleached post, then crouched to cup my hands around the bowl of a rusted lantern hanging limp from a nail. No wick inside, but the glass glowed faintly, pulsing with an ember-like breath. I blew gently, and the glow brightened, warming my palm. Behind me, the camp slumbered. Hank's deep rumble, Martinez's shift in his blanket, and old Crowfoot's soft snore even in his 80th year. None would wake for hours, and none would believe the music I'd chase at daybreak. But I'd learned too much to doubt what I heard with my own ears. I pressed a finger to the lantern's glass and thought of Slim's face framed by lamplit smoke, eyes full of that mournful song he carried. What had he found out there? What price did the desert demand for its lullaby? Dawn light crept over the ridgeline as I shouldered my rifle and followed a fence line toward the foothills. Coyote tracks crisscrossed the sand. Too many for one night, some fresh, some old. I paused at a weathered sign nailed to a post. Silver Creek Station, 20 miles. The letters were peeled back by sun and time, but I made out the word Silv, and then nothing. Silver Creek. An abandoned stop where prospectors once bartered gold for whiskey. I jogged my gaze uphill. The station lay half buried under collapsed tin roofs and rusted boilers. I crept among the ruins, shadowed by twisted girders and fallen beams. The music teased me, an echo of a bow on string, sharp and empty. I stopped by a trough, cupped water to my lips, and spied footprints in the mud, 2 sets leading away, then one. The prints were large, booted soles patterned with diamond spikes. Harding and Company cavalry boots, common enough, but made for soldiers, not drifters. I frowned. Slim never wore boots like those. I followed the single track, sliding past boulders and sage, until the wash twisted into a narrow ravine. The walls glowed pink in dawn's light, scarred by eroded layers of shale. Whisper-thin fissures ran through the stone like veins. Breezes sighed through them, carrying a melody I'd learned to dread. I froze, sure I heard a tune. 3 notes repeated, crisp as a shot. It beckoned deeper into the cleft. The ravine closed in overhead. I sheathed my rifle's bayonet and pressed forward, each step echoing against hard stone. The air cooled, heavy with damp. Moss clung to cracks. Small worms writhed in the puddles at my feet. I sensed movement in the shadows, a flicker of fabric or a glance of pale skin. But when I swung the lantern, nothing remained but stillness and drip, drip of water. On a sloping shelf of limestone I found them. Rows of empty canteens, dented and stained, their straps cobwebbed to nearby rocks. Some bore names scratched into the metal. M. Parker, L. Hayes, J. Crowley. Leather pouches lay tumbled at their bases, ripped open and looted. Whoever had passed this way carried supplies but left possessions behind. Maybe ran out of water or lost heart. I touched the rim of a canteen. It was cold, despite the sun climbing overhead. Then the melody struck again, louder, haunting. Two figures gliding through the haze, bow against string. I followed the sound around a bend and froze. Before me stood a silhouette. Tall, broad-shouldered, its hat brim tipped low. It leaned against the ravine wall, fiddle beneath its arm, head bowed. I swallowed and approached, voice low. "Slim?" The figure didn't move, but the music shifted, no longer slow, mournful. Now it ratcheted tension. Each note a nail driven into wood. My hand hovered on my rifle's trigger. "If that's you, come out." Silence answered. Then the figure straightened. Moonlight glinted off polished boots. A slender arm lifted the fiddle. A bow danced across 4 taut wires, carving a chord that tremored through my bones. I stepped forward, boots scraping the gravel. The figure turned, face obscured by shadow, features masked by time. But I saw the scars, faint lines across its cheek. I recognized them. The scratch from the bar fight in Dead Dog Gulch that Slim had shown me. Proof he'd survived that winter. My throat went dry. "Slim, don't." He cut me off with a single whisper. "You shouldn't have followed." The cord snapped, and the ravine exploded with sound. Rocks shivered loose, clattering down like hail. I stumbled back, lantern tumbling, glass cracking. Darkness swallowed the path behind me, and the air filled with that impossible music. Notes twisting into dissonant cries. I fired once, point blank, into the figure's chest. The shot echoed, and the music faltered. One plaintive note, hollow, then silence. I ran past the shattered lantern light, heart pounding, legs numb. Behind me, I heard boots on stone. 2, then 4, then dozens. Figures poured from cracks in the walls. Pale shapes in old cavalry uniforms. Fiddle bows hooked under arms. Faces blank, but for hollow eye sockets that glowed with a dim silver. They moved silent, circling me as the ravine closed. I raised my Colt, firing into their ranks. The bullets passed through them like mist, but each strike drew a stifled gasp, and the air filled with faint notes, dead men's music echoing my shots. Panic flared. I sprinted, stumbling over cairnstones I'd never seen before, rings of white granite sprouting from cracks, each topped with a fallen canteen, rimmed downward, like inverted chalices catching some unseen wine. At the top of the ravine, the sky reopened. I bounded out onto the flats, lungs burning. Behind me, the ravine's mouth yawned, lined with those cavalry ghosts, bows raised in silent salute. Their music chased me, a mournful dirge riding the wind. Dawn broke as I cleared the last hill. The prairies lay calm, cattle grazing, and the campfire's dim embers in the distance. My rifle's barrel smoked. My coat was flecked with chalky dust from the ravine. I forced Daisy into a trot. We galloped across open ground, the ghost's lament fading behind us into silence. When I reined in by our fire, the men stood waiting. Old Crowfoot rubbing his hands, Hank blinking awake, Martinez squinting at my wild eyes. I dismounted, voice raw. "They're real." Crowfoot spat and asked, "Who's real?" I reached into my coat and pulled out the broken bow, hair dangling like a lank ghost. The scratch from a steel spur at its base was fresh, one deep groove gouged overnight. I laid it on the stump. "They are," I said. "They're waiting for me to play." I pressed my spurs into Daisy's flanks and galloped straight on, past the last ring of cairns and into the heart of that silent dirge that chased me down the ravine. The wind tore at my coat, the whistles of bowed strings clamoring in my ears. I dared not look back, but I could feel their hollow gaze, the phantom cavalry circling just beyond sight, each ghostly soldier cradling a broken fiddle beneath his arm. Their lament grew louder with every hoofbeat, a chorus of grief and accusation that drove the rhythm of my pounding heart. The prairie rolled out before me, endless waves of grass tipped with morning light. I rode until the earth beneath Daisy's hooves warmed, until the sun climbed halfway to noon, and still the music rode the wind behind me, weaving through the mesquite and rattling the dry stalks. I leaned forward, voice ragged as I shouted into the haze, "Leave me be!" But my words were swallowed by that mournful chord. At last, I reached the remains of Silver Creek Station, rusted boilers and collapsed corrugated walls that gleamed in the sun like sunken ships. I dismounted, legs shaking, and led Daisy among the ruins. The air here was still, as if the world held its breath. The phantom notes tapered off into a single, urgent scratch, like a fiddle string drawn tight before its final pluck. I found myself before the old water trough that once slaked travelers' thirst. Its metal rim was cold, still bearing the dent where I'd struck it in frustration. Now, someone, or something, had drawn foul shapes in the rust, looping runs like musical bars, scratched deep enough to catch a fingernail. I knelt, brushing dust from the cymbals. They spelled my name, Carter Hayes, repeated again and again in jagged script. My blood turned to ice. The script was too deliberate to be random. Someone had stayed here, carved those letters into the trough at midnight, and walked away unharmed. But no living soul had been here. Not since Slim vanished. My fingers trembled as I traced the final inscription. "You owe us one." The breach in the corrugated wall groaned behind me. I spun, heart hammering. A shaft of light pierced the gloom, revealing a figure in the station's doorway. Tall, coat flapping like a specter, fiddle tucked under one arm. His hat brim cast his face in shadow, but I knew that lean silhouette. I swallowed. "Slim?" My voice cracked. The figure tilted his head, and the single note that drifted out sounded half hopeful, half sorrowful. Then he raised the fiddle, bow poised. The strings vibrated under his touch, humming a chord that resonated in my bones. But instead of the mournful dirge I'd heard before, this time the tune faltered into a plea. Two notes climbing, straining toward something unattainable. I shouldered my rifle and took aim, but hesitation froze my finger. The music wasn't anger. It wasn't threat. It was sorrow incarnate, a lament for all that had been lost. I saw the station's walls quake as the chord swelled, dust cascading from the rafters. Daisy stamped, whinnying low. The note shattered the still air and then cut off, leaving a silence so profound I felt it in my chest. Slim stepped toward me, the fiddle lowered. His boots crunched on broken glass. I saw the scars on his cheek, but his face wasn't his own. It was worn, etched by centuries of wandering souls who'd never found rest. His eyes glowed silver, like moonlight caught in water. "You owe us one," he whispered, the trough's words echoing off the corrugated tin. "A life for a life. Play your part." I staggered back, heart twisting. This isn't... My voice failed. The ghosts were there, I knew it. I could feel the phantom ranks filling the station's yard, pressing in like a tide of spirits. They waited for me to answer. The broken bow in my hand felt heavy as lead, ready to summon the song that bound them here. I looked at Slim's bowed head, at the hollow soldiers emerging behind him. The choice pressed on me with the weight of years and regrets. Play the final note, seal the bargain, and maybe release them, or refuse, and be claimed as their penance. The prairie wind stirred the broken rails, carrying a hush that filled the station like a shroud. I closed my eyes, raised the bow to the cracked fiddle body, and inhaled the dust-choked air. The ghosts held their breath. Daisy nickered. My finger found the string, heart pounding in my ears as hard as any drum. The world tilted, the station's walls bent, and I drew the bow across the string in one smooth motion. The note rang out, pure, trembling, a single thread tying the living to the dead. It soared through the station, through the circling specters, and into the empty prairie beyond. Then it shattered, splintering into silence. When I opened my eyes, Slim was gone. The phantom cavalry dissolved like mist in the dawn. The station lay empty, save for me, Daisy, and the broken fiddle. The trough bore my name once more, freshly carved, Carter Hayes. I tucked the fiddle under my arm, lifted the bow, and strode into the morning light. I didn't look back. The ghosts had their music. I had my life, at a price I wouldn't know until the final sunset. And the prairie was still, but for the whisper of wind through the mesquite, carrying a tune I could never quite forget. I pressed my spurs into Daisy's flanks and galloped straight on, past the broken rails and into the sunlit prairies, heart pounding like a war drum. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of dried grass and distant wildflowers. Behind me, that mournful echo of ghostly fiddles faded into silence, and I dared to hope the cavalry of specters had finally loosened their hold, but hope was a fragile thing out here, always liable to shatter on a sharp stone. By mid-afternoon, I found myself riding through a shallow arroyo, where the land dipped into a dry creek bed lined with weathered stones. Daisy's hooves clattered on the bedrock, and I leaned forward to peer into the shadows. There, half buried under a tumble of gravel, lay Slim's harmonica, nickel-plated, one reed bent flat. I dismounted and knelt beside it. The metal surface was scuffed, its edges bitten by rust, but I recognized the ornate engraving on the back, a curling vine motif. Slim swore came from French design. I lifted it carefully, and for a heartbeat the air quivered. A single, breathless note wavered from the reed, too soft to be heard, yet I felt it in my bones. Daisy stamped, flicking an ear toward the far bank, where mesquite shadows flickered. I pocketed the harmonica and mounted up again, uneasy. If Slim's fiddle and now his harmonica were here, scattered across the desert, then he'd left a trail deliberate as a handprint. Someone, or something, wanted me to follow. The arroyo opened out to rolling buttes crowned with sage. I urged Daisy onward, following the creek's old winding. By sundown, we reached a stand of cottonwoods, gnarled trunks straining skyward. Long ago, I'd camped here during the great blizzard. Slim and I huddled side by side under a makeshift lean-to, sharing the last of our jerky. I expected to find our old fire ring, cold and overgrown, but instead came upon fresh embers still glowing beneath half-burned logs. Smoke spiraled skyward. I dismounted and led Daisy to water pooling at the roots. She drank deeply while I gathered sticks for my own fire. The embers were hot enough to ignite tinder, and soon I had a small blaze, sparks drifting into the swallow-high branches. I laid the harmonica and broken bow beside the fire, careful they not vanish again. The sky ripened to bronze, then dimmed in violet as stars pricked out overhead. I listened to the wind stirring the cottonwood leaves. Far from the parched hush of the mesas, here the world breathed soft. I closed my eyes and remembered Slim's voice, low and full of longing when he first taught me that lullaby tune, the one he swore carried the weight of a dying man's heart. That memory ached, as if my own ribs constricted around it. I opened my eyes and stared at the fire's glow, wondering if Slim was alive, or if he'd surrendered to whatever pulled at his soul out there on the open range. A twig snapped beyond the firelight. I sat up, hand on my Colt. Daisy whickered, ears angled forward. I called, voice even. "Who's there?" No answer, only the sigh of wind weaving through branches. Yet, where the firelight fell, I sensed shapes shifting. Outlines of men wearing cavalry tunics, rifles slung across their backs, faces half turned toward me in silent salute. I blinked, and they vanished, leaving only drifting embers. I shook my head and rose, tossing another stick on the fire. I needed to push on. To pause here was to crawl into the ghost's embrace. At first light, I saddled Daisy and rode northeast, toward a ridge where buffalo once grazed by the hundreds. My aim was Cousin Jackson's homestead, a place I hadn't laid eyes on since I was boy, but which still lay marked on my fading map. Jackson had letters. He could tell me if anyone had ridden east with a fiddle case and a harmonica. Daisy navigated narrow goat trails until the sun was high. Then came a frame of weather-stained boards and sagging roof. Jackson's place. I rode up slow, scanning for signs of life. Smoke, hoof prints, or a weather vane still turning. The yard was empty save for a rusted plow half sunken in dirt. I tethered Daisy and tucked a photograph of Jackson and me, taken before we both traded boyhood for the trail, in my coat pocket. I knocked on the door with the butt of my rifle. No answer. Cautious, I pushed it open. Inside, the floor was swept clean, and on the table lay a ledger, its pages splayed. I thumbed to the last entry. June 12th, Slim Hayes passed through, fiddle intact. Paid for room and board. Left before dawn, headed east. Beneath that, scratched in haste, "Find him before he finds you." My blood ran cold. I stepped back, heart hammering. "Jackson?" I called out. Only the howl of wind answered. I crossed to the stove and saw pottery shards. Pieces of a coffee mug Jackson used, painted with a sunburst motif. Now the shards spelled words in the dust. Hijacked. Each letter scored deep like a lynching warning. I knelt to run my finger along the grooves. The meaning was unmistakable. Slim had been taken, not willingly, and the captor had left that warning as both boast and threat. A sudden creak behind me made me whirl. On the threshold stood a woman. Tall, lean, face set like clay, eyes the color of river stones. She wore Levi's trousers and a silver-trimmed waistcoat, hair braided over one shoulder. In her hand, she held a fiddle case, worn but undented. "You shouldn't have come," she said, voice soft as dust. The fire in my belly flared. "Where's Slim?" I barked. "What have you done with him?" She tilted her head, and a hard smile curved her lips. "He wasn't what I needed, but you—" She lifted the fiddle case. I recognized the carving along its edge, Slim's initials intertwined with the serpent motif. "You play, and you'll do." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. I raised my Colt, hand shaking. "You owe us one," she whispered, echoing the phantom inscription. Then she reached out, unfolded the fiddle case, and plucked the bow hair. It gleamed in the lantern light. "Play your debt, cowboy." The world narrowed to the instrument in her hand, the woman's unwavering gaze, and the ledger's last words. My finger trembled on the trigger, but the Colt felt useless. The fiddle was what mattered now. Its strings bound me to Slim's fate. I holstered the gun and crossed the room, heart pounding so loud I feared it'd unseat me. "Fine," I said, voice rough, "but we do this my way." I lifted the fiddle from her hand. Its wood was warm under my palm. I felt the grains pulse like a heartbeat I'd never heard before. Sweet, sorrowful notes hummed under my fingertips. I set my jaw and raised the bow. Outside, the wind died. All was still. In the hush, I could hear Slim's harmonica reed quaver in my coat pocket. I drew a deep breath and began to play. The first note broke the silence, careful and soft. Then the second, rising like dawn. The woman closed her eyes. The strings sang my long-lost lullaby. Each stroke dug into the ledger's warnings, the phantom cairn fields, the ghost cavalry's dirge. I channeled every memory of campfire songs, of midnight rides, of the emptiness that trails a vanished friend, into that melody. By the time the final note rang out, the air seemed to tremble. The woman's shoulders sagged. The fiddle slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor. She stared at me, eyes wide as the prairie night. "Your debt's paid," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "But so is mine." I stepped back. "Where's Slim?" My voice trembled. She knelt, swept the fiddle toward her. Then she stood, dusted her trousers, and smiled, a sad, weary curve. "He's where the music told him to go. Now, so are you." Before I could reply, the boards beneath her feet groaned, shifting. The ceiling beams trembled. Dust filled the air. I stumbled back as the ground lurched, and all at once the walls splintered inward. Light flooded in, a blinding beam that lifted the roof and scattered the woman like a shadow in wind. When my vision cleared, I stood alone amid the wreckage. The woman was gone. The fiddle lay in splinters. Strings melted to the floor. The harmonica in my pocket rattled. Then a single reed cracked off and rolled free. I watched it skitter across the dirt, resting on its edge like a tombstone. Outside, the sky was the pale blue of morning. The sun rose over Jackson's homestead, illuminating the rubble strewn by some unseen force. My coat was torn. My knuckles bled. I tasted dust and iron. I retrieved the reed and strapped it to my vest. Then I mounted Daisy and rode out through the blown-open doorway, away from the ruins. Behind me, the morning wind crackled through the broken beams, sounding for a moment like a faint, distant fiddle string resonating. I rode until the homestead vanished in the heat haze. The prairies stretched out again, silent and endless. I wondered if Slim walked them still, following his own music, or if he'd crossed into that somewhere beyond, where ghosts dance beneath a moon that never sets. All I had was a single reed, my colt, and a debt paid in song. The desert lay before me, patient and unyielding. I nudged Daisy forward. Somewhere out there, the next note waited to be played, and I'd be damned if I didn't answer its call. The sun dipped low as I crossed the last dry draw before the plains smoothed out into empty grasslands. My bones ached from days in the saddle, but something in the air drove me onward. A pull like gravity, deeper than any promise of rest. Daisy's flanks glistened with sweat, and I guided her to a trickle of water seeping through shale. She drank gratefully while I knelt to fill my canteen. The harmonica reed in my vest felt heavy against my chest, a weight I could neither cast off nor carry lightly. I studied the horizon. A lone windmill stood sentinel against the amber sky, blades tick-tick-ticking like a distant clock counting down my time. Beyond it lay a scatter of buildings stained to bone by sun and wind. Another ghost town. Slim and I once rode through one just like it, trading stories with a drunk prospector who claimed he struck silver veins but never filed a claim. I gave him whiskey. He gave us that name, Lost Promise Gulch. Now, the same name lay carved into the windmill's rusted leg, letters half erased by time. I dismounted and led Daisy toward the cluster of boards. The windmill's vane creaked overhead, a lone note against the hush. I checked the door of the saloon once bar, nailed shut. The boards were scored with carvings, names, dates, warnings. Don't follow the music. My heart skipped. I ran my fingers over the grooves. They were fresh, as if someone had sharpened a knife here just hours past. A sudden flicker drew my eye to a window where a faded sign hung inside. Sheriff's Office, 1882. Beneath it, the glass was cracked in a spiderweb pattern. I eased closer, breath held, and peered through the fracture. On the dusty floor lay a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and swollen with age. I pressed my fingers against the glass as Daisy's neigh echoed behind me. The journal's pages drifted in the breeze like dead leaves, open to a page stained brown with moisture, but the ink still legible. They play until you join, or the land claims your name. My throat tightened. I pried a board free with the butt of my rifle and slipped inside. The saloon was hollow, splintered bar, empty bottles layered in dust, rafters draped in cobwebs. The journal lay on a splintered table. I picked it up, flipping pages filled with cramped handwriting. Accounts of travelers who vanished after tracing music through canyons, of cattlemen lured into traps of stone rings, and of one entry that stood out in jagged letters. June 14th. He came at midnight, violin raised. I hear his song still. My debt is called. My blood ran cold. June 14th was last night. My debt, mine. I closed the journal fast, pressing it into my coat, and turned to leave. At the door, a scrap of paper fluttered at my boot, a hand-drawn map marking 7 cairn fields and the words, "Finish what he started." Outside, dusk deepened into violet, and the windmill's blades stuttered to a stop, as if time itself paused. Daisy stamped, uneasy. I mounted, journal in hand, and guided her east toward the first marked cairn. My colt felt useless here. All I had was my own song. The melody Slim taught me, the one that bound life to death and debt to freedom. I nudged Daisy forward. We stepped into the ring of stones. The ghost riders held their breath. The wind hushed. I drew the bent harmonica from my pocket and pressed it to my lips. My mouth was dry, my lungs tight, but I raised it and blew a single note, a trembling call that echoed between cairns. The first note trembled on my lips like a tremor through the land, low, wavering, uncertain. Then a second followed, stronger, rising through the hush of stones. I felt the cairns pulse beneath my boots as I played, each ring lighting faintly in time with the melody. The air around me thrummed. Mesquite leaves trembled, windmills far off stuttered in their slow dance, and the horizon trembled like oil on water. I let the harmonica sing the old lullaby Slim taught me, 2 minor chords echoing loss, one rising chord that carried hope, then a final descent into silence. Each breath carried the weight of his absence, each exhale a promise to finish what he could not. The ghost riders gathered closer, spectral capes brushing the ground, hooves stirring dust that shimmered in moonlight. Their fiddles hovered at their sides, bows quivering. As I played the closing phrase, the stones glowed bright, white-hot, as if lit from within. The harmonic chord snapped into the night, and the cairns blazed, illuminating every face among the phantom ranks. Young recruits lost to blizzards, ranch hands ambushed beyond the ridge, cavalry troopers felled by fever, all bound together in this unending chorus. They advanced a step, then froze. The final note lingered, hanging in the ether. Then, as one, they lowered their fiddles in silent salute. The glow faded, leaving only pale outlines of soldiers and the faint echo of that last chord. My breath came ragged. My fingers trembled on the reed. A sudden wind swept through the circle, scattering dust and lifting the edges of my coat. I tucked the harmonica back into my vest. The riders faded into the desert's gloom, their forms dissolving like mist at dawn. Only one remained. A broad-shouldered figure at the far edge of the stones, fiddle held across his chest, head bowed. I stepped forward, voice hushed. "Slim?" No answer. My heart clenched as the figure raised its head. It wore my friend's face, but hollowed by time. Eyes glassy, hair silvered. In the soft glow of starlight, he managed a slow nod, a gesture of gratitude, of farewell. Then he turned and walked toward the darkness beyond the cairns. With each step, his form thinned. First his coat, then his hat, then the very outline of his body, until he dissolved into the night wind. The plateaus beyond shimmered, and where he'd walked the stones lay silent and cold. The silence returned, deep as eternity. Only the rhythmic tapping of my heart filled the void. I knelt and ran my hand over the nearest cairn, its surface smooth and cool. For a moment I thought I felt a throb beneath the stone. An echo of life returned to the land. I rose, shoulders heavy, and faced the plains. Dawn's first light brushed the eastern sky in pale pinks and golds. The windmill's blades churned once, then stilled. My Colt felt light in its holster. The harmonica reed in my pocket felt warm. I mounted Daisy and rode back toward camp, the stone's map fading behind me. With every hill we crested, the weight in my chest eased, as though a debt had been settled by the song. Yet I knew some debts mark a man forever, etched in scars no bullet can touch. When I reached the bunkhouse, the others stirred. Hank sat at the fence, coffee cup in hand. Martinez rubbed sleep from his eyes. Even Crowfoot offered a nod, grizzled face inscrutable. I dismounted and approached the fire. With a careful hand, I produced the harmonica reed and laid it on a flat stone by the embers. The brass glinted in the dawn. I set my rifle aside, unbuckled my hat, and ran a hand through sweat-damp hair. They watched as I raised the harmonica and played one final bar. A simple major chord, bright and clean, a promise of new day. The sound carried across the camp, softened by morning light, and then faded into the crackle of the fire. Silence settled, warm and forgiving. Daisy nickered, nudging my leg. I closed my eyes, savoring the quiet that followed a long, unending melody. The ghosts were gone. The stones lay still, and the desert breathed around us, free, for now, to claim only the music we chose to play. I pocketed the reed, shouldered my Colt, and climbed onto Daisy's back. Ahead lay empty prairies, and every mile that ever beckoned me west. Deep down, I knew I carried Slim's story with me, etched in memory, carried on wind, and sealed by a song that never truly ends. As we rode away, the sun broke the sky in blazing gold, and I wondered, in that vast silence, would I ever hear another note on the wind, or had I finally laid the music and my debt to rest?